Springfield has survived more chaos than any town reasonably should. Bad planning, wild experiments, mysterious glowing things. Somehow, it's still standing. Today, we're going through its entire history, from the very start all the way to the modern mess we all know. Let's see how Springfield pulled this off. Springfield's story begins long before it became a map full of questionable zoning, surprising geological hazards, and a population that somehow stays the same size despite everything that happens to them. In the late 18th century, the land that would eventually carry the Springfield name was nothing but open wilderness. Quiet valleys, gentle hills, thick forests, and a river that flowed steadily through the region with the kind of calmness Springfield citizens would later wish they had. Into this landscape came a wagon party of settlers led by a man with an impressively long name and an equally impressive belief in his own greatness. Jebediah, Obadiah, Zechariah, Jedediah Springfield. He portrayed himself as a visionary leader, a courageous explorer, and a man destined for historical significance. Later generations would discover that several of these claims were exaggerated or outright invented, but at this early point in history, nobody was questioning anything. They were too busy trying to survive the frontier. Traveling with Jebediah was Shelbyville, Manhattan, a man whose personality, ambition, and stubbornness almost perfectly matched his partner's. For months, the two men led a diverse group of settlers westward. Their journey was long and difficult. They pushed through forests, crossed rivers, and navigated terrain that was sometimes beautiful, sometimes dangerous, and sometimes just downright inconvenient. But despite hardships, the expedition stayed united as it searched for a place to build a new community. When the settlers finally reached a promising stretch of land, spirits lifted. The region had fertile soil, natural water sources, and enough open space to support homes, farms, and whatever the future might require. It seemed like the ideal place to begin building a town. But as anyone familiar with Springfield knows, nothing truly important in its history happens without at least one major disagreement getting in the way. And the disagreement that split the founders of Springfield was unusual. As the settlers gathered to discuss what principles and values their new community should follow, Jebediah Springfield and Shelbyville, Manhattan discovered that they had completely opposite views about whether their settlement should allow marriage between close relatives. Jebediah strongly opposed the idea. Shelbyville strongly supported it. Neither man was willing to compromise. Their argument escalated rapidly, according to some accounts, faster than any other conflict in the settlement's early history. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and eventually the partnership between Jebediah and Shelbyville collapsed. The wagon group, once united, now divided into two camps, each following the leader whose viewpoint they agreed with. Jebediah Springfield took his followers and stayed in the region they had reached. There, he began establishing the settlement that would bear his name. Shelbyville, Manhattan, meanwhile, led his group farther west and founded a different community, one that would soon become Springfield's lifelong rival, Shelbyville. And so, with one strangely specific moral disagreement, two towns were born. Back in Springfield, Jebediah immediately began shaping the new settlement. He encouraged his followers to construct homes, plant crops, and outline the earliest form of the town's layout. He also took great interest in promoting himself as a legendary pioneer. Songs were written about him, stories were told of his bravery, and soon Jebediah Springfield became the town's most celebrated figure, not just a founder, but a symbol. The settlers carved out the earliest roads, which were little more than packed dirt paths, but served as the backbone for Springfield's future layout. They built houses from timber, erected a central meeting hall, and created a trading area where goods and news could be exchanged. These structures were simple, but they formed the core of what would become a fully developed town. Springfield's terrain played a major role in shaping its early direction. The rolling hills offered natural boundaries, the fertile valleys supported farms, and the river provided drinking water, irrigation, and transportation. There was also Springfield Gorge, an enormous canyon that prevented westward expansion. At the time, it was considered a hazard to avoid, not the backdrop for ill-advised stunts. The settlers simply looked at it, nodded to themselves, and said, "Let's not go near that." Despite the roughness of frontier life, Springfield grew steadily. More settlers arrived, either joining family members or seeking opportunity. Small businesses emerged: blacksmiths, general stores, workshops, and taverns. These establishments became gathering places where the earliest Springfield residents formed a sense of community. Education began early as well. A small schoolhouse was formed to teach children basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. It also served as a convenient place to teach them a carefully curated set of stories about Jebediah Springfield's life. Whether the stories were true was not a major concern. What mattered was building civic pride and reinforcing the idea that Springfield had been founded on strong moral values. Children learned that their town's founder was courageous, wise, and full of integrity. These lessons would stay with them as they grew into adults and passed the same stories down to their own children. Of course, Springfield's early history was not without conflict. Settlers argued over land boundaries, water rights, crop distribution, and livestock ownership. Occasionally, disagreements escalated into loud confrontations, but the community's desire for stability ensured that most problems were resolved peacefully. Springfield might not have been perfect, but it was united by a shared vision and a shared belief in its heroic founder. The rivalry with Shelbyville formed early, even before either community had fully developed. Springfield citizens viewed themselves as morally principled and more civilized. Shelbyville's residents, on the other hand, thought Springfield was self-righteous. These early tensions shaped how both towns built their identities. Competitions emerged over resources, trade routes, and town reputation. Springfield believed it was founded for noble reasons. Shelbyville believed Springfield was too proud. Both beliefs were correct in their own way. As decades passed, Springfield matured. Wooden buildings were replaced with sturdier structures. Dirt roads became more defined. The local government expanded its responsibilities, and Springfield's population diversified as new families arrived. The settlement developed its own rhythm: seasonal planting, market days, community meetings, and occasional celebrations honoring Jebediah Springfield, whose heroic status continued to rise to near mythic levels. The founding generation eventually passed on, but their legacy endured. Their values, traditions, and myths shaped the next generation's understanding of what Springfield stood for. Jebediah Springfield's influence extended far beyond his lifetime, guiding how citizens thought about leadership, morality, and community identity. His statue, stern, proud, and slightly larger than life, became one of Springfield's earliest landmarks. By the time Springfield entered its 19th century, it had grown from a small frontier outpost into a town with structure, identity, and ambition. Its early settlers had created a community rooted in shared beliefs, strong work ethic, and the conviction that their town was destined for something greater, though they probably did not imagine just how strange that destiny would eventually become. The foundations of Springfield were now firmly in place. Farms stretched across the valley, businesses lined the town's main road, and families filled the neighborhoods that grew outward from the original settlement. Springfield was no longer simply a place where a wagon party had stopped. It had become a town with a personality, a purpose, and an evolving story that would only grow more complex in the years ahead. And as Springfield moved into its next era, marked by industrial expansion, cultural development, and more peculiar events, the legacy of its founding would continue shaping everything that came afterward. The ideals, conflicts, and personalities of these early years left a permanent imprint on the town, defining not only where Springfield came from, but also what kind of place it would eventually become.
As Springfield entered its second generation, the town began to develop a personality of its own, one that blended practicality, pride, and a noticeable tolerance for odd events. The settlers who built Springfield from scratch passed the routines, beliefs, and stories to their children, who grew up surrounded by the idea that their town was not just ordinary, but special. It was a community founded on moral clarity, forged through hardship, and united under the enduring legend of Jebediah Springfield. And while many parts of that legend were debatable, Springfield citizens preferred not to debate them too hard. By the early 19th century, Springfield's population had expanded enough to support a more defined civic structure. New families arrived regularly, often following rumors that the settlement offered good farmland, dependable water, and a strong sense of community. For the most part, this was true. For the rest, Springfield's residents were happy to smooth over the rougher details when visitors asked questions. Local governance became more complex as the town grew. In addition to managing land boundaries and water distribution, Springfield's leaders began addressing issues like public safety, community planning, and local commerce. While none of these responsibilities were handled with the kind of precision one might expect in a modern city, the early leaders did their best. Their decisions laid the groundwork for the political system Springfield uses now, systems that future historians would describe as functional enough, all things considered. One of the most important developments in this era was the creation of permanent institutions. Springfield built larger meeting halls, expanded its schoolhouse, and established more formal marketplaces. These structures played essential roles in unifying the community. Schools taught children literacy, arithmetic, and an increasingly enthusiastic version of Springfield's founding story. Marketplaces introduced a growing variety of goods, connecting Springfield to neighboring settlements. Meeting halls hosted discussions, celebrations, and occasional arguments that threatened to last all night. The economy diversified as new professions appeared. Beyond farming and blacksmithing, Springfield gained carpenters, leather workers, bakers, millers, and merchants. Some settlers even experimented with crafts that were considered unusual for the time, such as candle makers who experimented with scented wax, and one enthusiastic inventor who insisted he was close to creating a portable bread toasting device. His neighbors listened politely, which is a recurring pattern in Springfield history. Despite its growth, Springfield still maintained close ties to nature during this period. The surrounding forests provided lumber, medicinal herbs, and wildlife. The river supported fishing and transportation. The hills offered grazing lands, lookout points, and a sense of natural protection that gave Springfield its cozy valley feel. But the land also presented occasional challenges. Severe winters, unpredictable weather, and soil exhaustion forced the town to adapt. Springfield survived these difficulties through cooperation and the reassuring belief that their founder would have wanted them to persevere. Culturally, Springfield developed traditions that reinforced community values. Celebrations honoring Jebediah Springfield became annual events. These festivals included parades, reenactments, and speeches celebrating the founder's courage, speeches that grew longer every year. Children recited short poems praising Springfield's origins, and many residents proudly displayed symbols of the founder around town. Over time, the image of Jebediah became so central to Springfield's identity that it seemed impossible to imagine the town without him. This close attachment to Jebediah's legacy would later be tested, but in these early decades, it served as a powerful unifying force. Springfield residents believed their town was morally superior to its neighbors, especially to Shelbyville. Even though the dispute that created the two towns was highly unusual, Springfield embraced its origins as a symbol of ethical strength. Shelbyville, meanwhile, continued building its own identity, and a rivalry that grew more intense each year. The tension between the two towns influenced many parts of early Springfield life. Competitions arose over agriculture, trade, and even minor incidents like livestock wandering across borders. Springfield citizens framed these events as tests of their town's values. Shelbyville residents framed them as minor annoyances. This difference in perspective fueled ongoing disputes, but it also provided motivation. Springfield found strength in its rivalry, striving to prove itself through deed, reputation, and, when needed, sheer stubbornness. One particularly unusual event in Springfield's early years involved the discovery of a large ancient tooth embedded in a hillside near the town. Some residents believed it was evidence that a giant creature once lived in the area. Others insisted it was simply an oversized animal tooth. And a small but enthusiastic group suggested that it might belong to Jebediah Springfield himself, explaining this theory with great confidence and a surprising lack of biological understanding. While the tooth was eventually displayed in a small local museum, its true origin remains a mystery, much like many things in Springfield. Another noteworthy chapter was Springfield's early involvement in regional politics. Representatives from the town attended meetings with neighboring settlements to discuss trade agreements, border rules, and resource management. These early negotiations shaped Springfield's relationships with nearby communities and formed the basis for later political alliances. Even in these interactions, Springfield maintained a proud, sometimes overly proud, sense of self. Delegates often referenced the town's founding values during discussions, whether or not the topic called for it. Throughout these years, Springfield's identity evolved through subtle changes. Houses became sturdier, businesses more established, and roads better defined. Decorative touches appeared. Carved signs above doorways, small gardens outside homes, and banners hung during festivities. The town felt increasingly permanent, a place destined to last. Travelers noted that Springfield had a distinctive character, shaped by its people's pride, traditions, and occasionally eccentric decisions. The settlement continued to grow into the mid-19th century, reaching a size that required new levels of coordination. More citizens meant more voices in public discussions. Town leaders found themselves juggling competing needs: farm expansion versus forest preservation, traditional values versus new ideas, and small-scale workshops versus growing interest in industrial equipment. Springfield's leaders handled these challenges with varying degrees of success. Some decisions strengthened the community. Others created new problems that future leaders would have to fix. Religious and cultural institutions also expanded. Small churches were built, each becoming centers of moral and social life. Community gatherings included not only celebrations, but also lectures, music performances, and craft demonstrations. These events allowed residents to strengthen their sense of identity and comfort, turning Springfield into a place where families could build lives centered on community connection. As Springfield developed, its residents maintained a sense of humor about their town's quirks, even if they didn't recognize them fully at the time. Stories circulated about peculiar weather, random small earthquakes, and occasional sightings of animals that weren't technically native to the region. People accepted these anomalies with a shrug and the practical attitude that frontier life always came with surprises. The legacy of Jebediah Springfield continued to influence everyday life. New generations learned the town's founding story in school, often in versions slightly more dramatic than the ones their parents heard. Teachers taught that Jebediah was courageous, virtuous, and unwavering in his beliefs. Festivities grew larger as the years passed, turning Founders Day into an event filled with performances, speeches, and reenactments where children enthusiastically portrayed the earliest settlers, some with historically accurate costumes and some wearing outfits that were clearly made from curtains. Eventually, Springfield reached a point where it no longer felt like an isolated frontier community. Trade routes expanded, connecting the town to wider networks. Farmers sold crops to merchants traveling through the region. Caravans brought goods from distant cities. This increased contact with the outside world exposed Springfield to new ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. These influences set the stage for Springfield's transition into the industrial age. New machinery became available, larger workshops opened, the town began experimenting with early forms of manufacturing. Citizens debated the pros and cons of modernization, some embracing it eagerly, others worrying about whether Springfield's traditions would fade. These debates, like everything else in Springfield, were conducted with passion, strong opinions, and at least one person insisting loudly that things should stay exactly as they were. By the time Springfield approached the late 19th century, it was firmly established as a thriving town with a strong sense of its own identity. Its citizens were optimistic, hardworking, and deeply proud of its community's origins. They believed their town had been founded for noble reasons, built on moral values, and destined for greatness. little did they know just how unusual, unpredictable, and downright chaotic that destiny would eventually become. By the mid-19th century, Springfield had firmly moved beyond its frontier roots. The small wooden structures, scattered farms, and dirt paths of its earliest days had matured into an increasingly organized community. Springfield was no longer simply a settlement. It was becoming a recognizable town with established neighborhoods, functioning institutions, and the first signs of the complex society it would eventually become. The growth was steady, shaped by both predictable forces, like population increase, expanding agriculture and trade, and less predictable forces, including Springfield's unusual geography and its occasionally dramatic reactions to infrastructure decisions. But for now, progress came with more optimism than chaos. Springfield's economy in this period was rooted in agriculture. The fertile valley supported a wide variety of crops: corn, wheat, vegetables, fruit orchards, and later small-scale livestock industries. Families depended heavily on farming, and entire neighborhoods grew around agricultural routines. Markets bustled during harvest seasons, grain mills appeared along the riverbanks, powered by water wheels that creaked steadily and filled the air with the familiar rhythm of frontier machinery. Trade routes expanded as Springfield found itself positioned at a natural crossroads for travelers moving between nearby settlements. Merchants stopped through town to resupply, rest, and exchange news. These visits introduced Springfield to new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. In turn, Springfield developed a reputation as a hospitable stopping point, a place where travelers could rest, eat, and occasionally attend a community festival if they happened to arrive on the right day. As the population grew, Springfield's leaders recognized the need for more coordinated governance. Early governmental roles, once limited to land disputes and resource allocation, began expanding. Officials now dealt with taxation, infrastructure maintenance, town planning, and public safety. The political system was simple by modern standards, but impressively complex compared to the earliest days. Town meetings took on greater importance. Citizens gathered to debate issues ranging from school expansion to the construction of new bridges and roads. These debates were spirited, sometimes emotional, and occasionally derailed by someone telling a long story about how things used to be better. But gradually, Springfield developed the political habits that would define it for generations: passionate opinions, lengthy speeches, and decisions that reflected both reasoning and stubbornness. During this era, Springfield began formalizing some of its long-term institutions. The school system expanded from a single small building into multiple classrooms, accommodating a growing student population. Education became a central value in Springfield life, and teachers took pride in their work, even when their students were more enthusiastic about recess than arithmetic. The curriculum included reading, writing, basic math, civic values, and of course, a detailed and somewhat embellished history of Jebediah Springfield. By now, his legend was stronger than ever. Religious and cultural organizations also thrived. Churches grew in number, providing not only spiritual guidance but also community services, charity efforts, and gathering spaces. Community halls hosted craft fairs, music performances, and social dances. These events played a vital role in creating a shared identity for Springfield residents, giving them opportunities to connect outside of work and responsibilities. One notable characteristic of Springfield during this time was its growing diversity. Travelers who stopped in town occasionally decided to stay, attracted by Springfield's welcoming atmosphere and opportunities. Families arrived from different regions and countries, bringing traditions, recipes, craftsmanship, and stories that gradually enriched Springfield's cultural fabric. This diversity would later shape Springfield into the eclectic community it is known for. As Springfield expanded, new neighborhoods formed, each with its own character.
Some areas were densely populated with families and small homes, while others featured larger properties, workshops, and barns. Roads improved, making local travel easier. The town square became a central hub for activity, with markets, public announcements, and community gatherings. However, Springfield's growth was not always smooth. The town frequently encountered unusual natural phenomena. Small tremors, unexpected floods, and bizarre weather patterns that seemed determined to keep citizens alert. Many frontier towns experienced harsh conditions, but Springfield seemed to attract them with unusual consistency. Residents responded with equal parts practicality and resignation. When strange things happened, they simply shrugged, made repairs, and continued with their routines. Meanwhile, the rivalry with Shelbyville intensified as both towns expanded. Springfield citizens viewed Shelbyville as a competitor in agriculture, trade, and reputation. Shelbyville viewed Springfield as unnecessarily proud. These disagreements manifested in every imaginable area. Disputes over land borders, debates about shared resources, and minor incidents involving wandering livestock. Springfield residents embraced the rivalry with enthusiasm, convinced it strengthened their town's determination. Around this time, Springfield began transitioning into the early industrial era. Innovations that appeared in major cities slowly spread to smaller towns, including Springfield. Machinery became more common in farms, mills, and workshops. Water-powered sawmills increased production. Blacksmiths incorporated new tools and techniques. Inventors tested designs that ranged from practical improvements to questionable experiments involving steam power.
The introduction of early industrial equipment improved efficiency, but also brought challenges. Some residents resisted the changes, preferring traditional methods. Others embraced them eagerly, fascinated by the possibilities of technology. This tension created a cultural divide between Springfield's more conservative citizens and its growing number of innovators. Over time, however, the benefits of modernization won out, and Springfield gradually adopted new machinery in agriculture, construction, and transportation. Transportation infrastructure expanded as well. Bridges were built across the river, enabling easier movement of goods and people. Wagons carried produce along improved roads. Springfield's geographical position made it a natural hub for regional trade. As trade increased, local businesses flourished. Markets grew larger. Workshops gained steady customers. Tavern owners enjoyed a boost in traffic from visiting merchants, travelers, and the occasional eccentric wanderer. Significant architectural development marked this era too. Large public buildings appeared, improved schools, bigger meeting halls, larger churches, and the earliest versions of governmental offices. These structures reflected Springfield's growing confidence in its future. They were built to last, sturdy, practical, and surprisingly resistant to the disasters that would challenge Springfield in later years. One important milestone was the establishment of Springfield's first formal newspaper. Although small in circulation, the paper became a vital source of information. It reported on local events, town decisions, notable accomplishments, and sometimes mildly sensational stories involving unusual happenings. Citizens read it eagerly, enjoying the mix of news, community updates, and occasional editorials about how neighboring towns, particularly Shelbyville, were doing things incorrectly. Amid all this development, the legend of Jebediah Springfield remained the emotional heart of the town. His heroic story was retold with increasing enthusiasm as Springfield grew. Statues, paintings, and commemorative plaques appeared around town. Schools taught children about his deeds. Public speeches referenced his moral principles. Communities are often shaped by the myths they choose to embrace, and Springfield embraced its founding legend wholeheartedly. Over time, however, subtle questions arose. Some scholars and historians noticed contradictions in the earliest records of Jebediah's life. Certain stories seemed less plausible upon close inspection. A few claimed that the famous founder might not have been as heroic as everyone believed.
But these whispers of doubt were not strong enough to shake the town's faith. Not yet. Springfield's identity depended too much on the story of Jebediah to allow serious questioning. By the late 19th century, Springfield had reached a new level of complexity. It was no longer a small rural community, but a functioning town with industry, culture, politics, and a growing sense of destiny. Families who had lived in Springfield for generations felt a deep connection to their home. Newcomers adapted to the town's traditions and added their own influences. Springfield's strange charm was beginning to emerge, a mixture of pride, resilience, and mild eccentricity that would define it for centuries. Springfield was ready to enter the industrial age fully. The stage was set for major changes: factories, railroads, rapid expansion, and technological advances that would reshape the town forever. The next era would bring prosperity, complications, and a level of chaos that future historians, working very hard to remain professional, would describe as uniquely Springfield. As Springfield stepped fully into the later 19th century, the pace of its growth quickened. New families continued to arrive, drawn by the town's expanding opportunities and reputation for steady progress. Springfield now buzzed with activity: carpenters constructing new homes, farmers hauling produce to the market, merchants opening storefronts along increasingly busy streets. What had begun as a modest frontier settlement was transforming into a lively, ambitious town with its own sense of identity and purpose. One of the defining factors of this era was infrastructure. Roads that once consisted of irregular dirt paths were now reshaped, straightened in some areas, widened in others. Bridges over the river were reinforced with better materials, ensuring safer transport for wagons carrying goods and livestock. New roads connected Springfield to neighboring communities, including Shelbyville, much to the annoyance of both towns. The improved roads made trade easier, but they also made it easier for Springfield citizens to compare themselves to Shelbyville more frequently, and vice versa, which neither town particularly enjoyed. The increased traffic through Springfield brought economic benefits. Blacksmiths forged tools and wagon parts for travelers. Inns and taverns hosted merchants and families passing through. Markets became larger and livelier, filled with produce, handmade goods, textiles, pottery, and imported items that surprised some residents, like decorative hairbrushes that nobody in Springfield had asked for, but everyone suddenly wanted. The industrial influence continued to grow. Factories were not yet widespread, but early industrial workshops appeared throughout Springfield. Some specialized in textiles, weaving cloth that was sold locally and traded regionally. Others produced tools, barrels, or farming equipment. These workshops employed both skilled artisans and young apprentices, giving Springfield a workforce that balanced tradition with emerging technology. Not all reactions to industrialization were positive. Some longtime farmers worried that mechanized tools might disrupt their way of life. Others feared that Springfield's traditions would be overshadowed by industry and modernization. These concerns were discussed frequently at community meetings, where citizens debated the future with the same level of passion Springfield would later apply to issues like monorail construction and football team loyalty. In the end, Springfield adopted industrial changes gradually, blending them with its existing values rather than replacing them outright.
Energy production began to shift as well. While much of Springfield still relied on manual labor and water-powered mills, discussions emerged about the potential of steam power. Springfield's leaders were cautious. They had heard rumors of machines exploding in distant cities and preferred not to introduce anything that might launch debris through the air. Nonetheless, curiosity about new energy sources grew, laying the groundwork for the technological advancements that would reshape Springfield in the 20th century. Culturally, Springfield matured during this era. Public events became more organized and more frequent. Founders' Day expanded into a grand town festival with music, dancing, parades, and dramatic reenactments of Jebediah Springfield's legendary achievements.
It was during this period that the legend became most deeply intertwined with civic pride. Children memorized passages about Jebediah's bravery. Artists sculpted his likeness. Adults repeated his stories with a confidence that increased each time the story was told, even when certain details seemed suspiciously exaggerated. Springfield's local newspaper grew in influence, becoming a cherished part of daily life. Residents relied on it not only for practical information, like weather forecasts and trade prices, but also for colorful stories about unusual events, stories that Springfield delivered routinely. Whether it was a farmer reporting that his cow had wandered off and reappeared mysteriously on a rooftop, or a traveling salesman claiming he saw strange lights in the sky above the gorge, Springfield's newspaper provided entertainment as much as information. Springfield's relationship with its environment also evolved. The town expanded into new areas, clearing forests, diverting small waterways, and modifying land to accommodate growth. These changes sometimes produced unintended consequences. Clearing forests led to minor landslides. Diverting water altered drainage patterns. Building close to the gorge occasionally resulted in structures that were a little too close to the edge for comfort. Residents handled these issues with ingenuity and determination, qualities that would serve them repeatedly in the decades to come. One notable development was the rise of community organizations focused on public welfare. Civic groups formed to address issues like fire prevention, road safety, sanitation, and education. These groups provided volunteer labor and practical solutions to keep Springfield functioning smoothly. They also added to Springfield's growing list of unofficial officials, individuals who took great pride in overseeing community projects and ensuring that everyone knew how important those projects were. As Springfield expanded, it began attracting people with specialized skills. Engineers, surveyors, architects, and craftsmen arrived to help design the town's next phase. Their influence led to more advanced buildings, cleaner town layouts, and the construction of public works projects. Some of these projects succeeded brilliantly, others produced mixed results. One ambitious town planner tried to create a perfectly symmetrical grid of streets, only for the plan to be disrupted when a stubborn landowner refused to move his barn. Springfield's roads still bear the mark of this compromise, a bend in the road that seems to exist for no apparent reason. Springfield's transition from a rural town to a budding industrial center was also marked by important social changes. The population grew larger and more diverse. Families from different backgrounds built homes in Springfield, bringing new traditions and perspectives to the community. Children formed friendships across neighborhoods, and families shared customs in festivals and gatherings. These cultural exchanges enriched Springfield's identity, making it a town with a character both familiar and ever-evolving. Education continued to advance as well. New school buildings replaced the original one-room schoolhouse. Teachers introduced expanded subjects, including geography, natural science, and civics. Students learned about the wider world, developing a sense of curiosity that extended beyond Springfield's borders. Some even dreamed of traveling to distant cities, though most returned to Springfield after discovering that those cities didn't have Founders' Day parades nearly as impressive. The blossoming industrial era also led to changes in leisure and entertainment. Theaters appeared, offering stage performances, musical events, and occasional traveling shows from other towns. Social clubs formed, providing spaces for discussion, games, and community decision-making. Outdoor recreation grew more popular as residents explored Springfield's surrounding landscapes, hills, forests, and the gorge, which remained both a fascination and a source of humorous local warnings. Springfield's relationship with Shelbyville evolved during this period. As both towns expanded, competition intensified. Disputes over borders, resources, and transportation routes grew more common. Springfield residents believed they upheld stronger moral values. Shelbyville residents insisted they were more practical. Sports competitions emerged as a relatively peaceful outlet for rivalry, though even these could escalate into arguments over rules, referees, and the precise definition of fair play. Despite occasional tensions, the rivalry pushed both towns to improve. Springfield invested in its schools, infrastructure, and public works, in part to ensure it stayed ahead of Shelbyville. In a roundabout way, this rivalry contributed to Springfield's progress, motivating its citizens not only to work harder, but to celebrate accomplishments with great enthusiasm. By the close of the 19th century, Springfield had reached a crucial point in its development. The town had embraced modernization while preserving its traditions. Industry was rising, but agriculture remained vital. Population growth made Springfield lively and diverse. Government systems, though imperfect, kept the town functioning. And the spirit of Jebediah's founding legacy still shaped Springfield's identity, guiding its culture and community values. Springfield was now prepared for the transformations of the 20th century. Electricity, railroads, major industries, cultural revolutions, and population booms were coming. They would reshape the town in ways early settlers could not have imagined. Springfield was about to enter a period of growth, challenge, and change, unlike anything it had experienced before. But through it all, the foundation laid by its founders and the traditions carried by generations of Springfield families would remain. Springfield was growing, modernizing, and evolving, but it would always remain Springfield, a town proud of its history, loyal to its legends, and only slightly confused by its own geography.
As Springfield stepped into the 20th century, it did so with a mixture of determination, curiosity, and a level of optimism that would later seem both admirable and slightly naive. The town was expanding quickly, powered by new technologies, shifting cultural norms, and a growing belief that Springfield's best days were ahead. For the first time, Springfield felt less like a frontier town and more like a small but promising city, one preparing to take its place in a rapidly changing world. The industrial era hit Springfield in waves. It didn't arrive all at once. Instead, new machines, ideas, and ways of working trickled into the town gradually, each one adding another layer to Springfield's increasingly modern identity. Small workshops grew into larger manufacturing spaces. Water wheels and hand tools gave way to electric motors and automated equipment. Even Springfield's farmers, who had resisted change for decades, began adopting mechanized plows and harvesters, often after watching a neighbor dramatically outproduce them. The arrival of electricity was one of the most transformative developments. Street lamps replaced lanterns, lighting Springfield's main roads with a warm glow that impressed locals and confused wildlife. Businesses stayed open later, and homes adopted electric lighting with pride. Residents gathered outside at night just to stare at the new lamps, discussing how they made everything feel modern and big city, even though Springfield remained quite far from becoming either. Electric utilities were overseen by early power stations that looked impressive from the outside and slightly alarming from the inside. They were staffed by workers who understood most of what the machines did and improvised the rest. This approach worked surprisingly well and set the philosophical tone for much of Springfield's future engineering work. Transportation also advanced rapidly. Dirt roads were paved, horse-drawn wagons gave way to early automobiles. Springfield's first car owners were treated with awe and suspicion in equal measure. Awe because driving a motorized vehicle was undeniably impressive. Suspicion because people were not entirely convinced that such machines weren't powered by unstable magic. But it was the arrival of the railroad that changed Springfield most dramatically.
a major rail line finally reached the town, connecting it to distant cities and economic hubs. For the first time, Springfield could send its products far beyond regional markets. Trains brought goods, mail, machinery, travelers, and ideas that Springfield had never encountered before. The railroad also brought excitement, and, in true Springfield fashion, the occasional minor catastrophe involving misplaced cargo or over-enthusiastic passengers. The railroad station became one of Springfield's most important landmarks. Its platforms bustled with activity as shipments arrived and departed. Local businesses flourished as they gained access to national markets. New industries appeared, ranging from textile production to food processing. Some succeeded brilliantly. Others produced items nobody knew what to do with, such as wooden novelty puzzles shaped like the gorge. The cultural impact of the railroad was equally significant. Residents encountered new trends in fashion, music, literature, and entertainment. Newspapers from large cities arrived regularly, offering a window into national events. Traveling entertainers visited Springfield, performing shows that fascinated audiences unused to sophisticated theater productions. This cultural exchange helped Springfield develop a more cosmopolitan identity, though one still firmly grounded in local traditions and occasional eccentricities. Politically, Springfield continued to evolve. The early 20th century saw the rise of more organized political parties and more ambitious candidates. Campaigns grew louder, speeches grew longer, and promises grew more extravagant. Some candidates pledged to improve infrastructure, strengthen industry, or attract more businesses. Others promised to honor Springfield's traditions or finally defeat Shelbyville in regional competitions. All promised something, even when they weren't entirely sure how to deliver it. Municipal projects reflected Springfield's growing ambitions. New schools were constructed to accommodate rising enrollment. Parks were established, offering residents peaceful green spaces for leisure and recreation. Libraries expanded, though most citizens continued using them primarily during heat waves when the reading rooms were cooler than their homes. Springfield even attempted to implement early versions of city planning, an admirable effort, hampered slightly by Springfield's geography, Springfield's zoning instincts, and Springfield's legendary ability to put things in places that didn't fully make sense. One of the major developments of this era was the expansion of Springfield's industrial district. Factories were built near the railroad tracks, taking advantage of easy transport access. These factories produced mattresses, canned foods, footwear, tools, rope, and occasionally products that defy easy explanation. The district attracted workers from both Springfield and neighboring towns, contributing to a population boom. New neighborhoods formed around the factories, filled with workers and their families. With industrialization came challenges. Air quality declined, noise increased. Workers faced long hours, dangerous machinery, and strict schedules. Springfield responded by forming early labor groups that advocated for safer conditions, reasonable pay, and breaks long enough to eat lunch without sprinting. Their efforts were modest but meaningful, laying the groundwork for later labor movements and Springfield's long tradition of workplace complaints. Another major influence of the early 20th century was immigration. Families arrived from different parts of Europe, Asia, and other regions seeking opportunity and stability. They brought languages, cooking styles, craftsmanship, and cultural celebrations that enriched Springfield's character. New neighborhoods formed, each with unique traditions that blended with Springfield's existing culture. Diversity became one of Springfield's strengths, contributing to the town's resilience and distinct identity.
Public services expanded as well. Springfield established its modern fire department, an organized police force, and improved sanitation systems. These services were not always perfect. Firefighters occasionally got lost on their way to fires, and sanitation workers sometimes found themselves cleaning up unexpected substances, but they marked a leap forward in public health and safety. Citizens appreciated the improvements even when they didn't fully trust them. The town's rivalry with Shelbyville continued to intensify during this time.
Springfield believed its industrial progress made it superior. Shelbyville insisted its own growth was more impressive. Both towns encouraged competitions in sports, fairs, and even academic contests, competitions that sometimes got a little heated and usually ended with Springfield and Shelbyville accusing the other of cheating in extremely creative ways. Culturally, Springfield embraced the new century with enthusiasm. Cinemas opened, showing silent films to delighted audiences. Dance halls hosted lively social events. Music drifted through the town in new styles, ragtime, early jazz, and marches performed by local bands. Springfield's artistic community grew too, with painters, illustrators, and musicians contributing to the town's evolving identity. The biggest influence of the early 20th century, however, was the gradual rise of large-scale industry, a movement that would eventually lead to one of Springfield's most defining features, the Springfield nuclear power plant. But that was still decades away. For now, Springfield's industrial development remained relatively traditional, centered around manufacturing, textiles, machinery, and food production. Springfield was growing quickly, changing rapidly, and embracing the future with optimism. The town felt larger, busier, and more connected to the world than ever before. And even though Springfield's unique ability to attract trouble had begun to reveal itself, the early decades of the 20th century represented a time of opportunity and expansion. Springfield stood on the threshold of modernization, ready to enter an era that would bring electricity, automobiles, major industries, cultural revolutions, and population booms. The next wave of progress would reshape the town in ways its founders could not have imagined, though Jebediah Springfield, if he were still around, would absolutely pretend he saw it coming. As Springfield moved deeper into the early 20th century, its transformation accelerated. The arrival of larger factories, better infrastructure, and increased connectivity made Springfield feel less like a rural town and more like a growing city. Residents looked around at the expanding streets, the rising smokestacks, and the bustling train station and began using words like modern, progressive, and advanced, even when they weren't entirely sure what those words meant. The expanding industrial district became the beating heart of Springfield's economy. Factories produced furniture, machine parts, textiles, processed food, and dozens of other products that traveled by rail to distant markets. Springfield's name began appearing on crates, shipping labels, and catalog listings. Some Springfield residents interpreted this as proof that their town was on the verge of becoming a major city. Others saw it as a sign that things were getting a little too busy. Inside these factories, workers operated increasingly complex machinery. Steam-powered equipment gave way to electric models, which were both more efficient and capable of breaking down in even more interesting ways. Workshops echoed with the sounds of metal striking metal, gears turning, and the occasional startled yell from someone discovering that a machine they thought was off was actually very much on. Despite the challenges, industrial jobs provided steady income, attracting workers from smaller rural communities. Entire families moved into Springfield's new neighborhoods, filling rows of working-class homes built near factories. Children played in narrow streets lined with laundry lines, brick walls, and factory whistles that marked the rhythm of daily life. These neighborhoods contributed significantly to Springfield's culture. Busy, loud, and full of people with strong opinions about how things should be run. The town's transportation network grew in response to industrialization. Roads extended farther outward, connecting Springfield to new outlying settlements. Trolleys and early bus lines were introduced, offering public transportation within the expanding city limits. These systems were useful, though not always efficient. Trolleys occasionally stalled on steep hills, and early buses sometimes struggled to start on cold mornings. But Springfield residents appreciated having options besides walking or attempting to negotiate with a stubborn horse. The railroad system, however, remained Springfield's most important transportation asset.
Additional tracks were laid, increasing the town's shipping capacity. New lines connected Springfield to bustling urban centers, bringing a steady flow of goods, travelers, and culture. The station area became a lively commercial zone filled with vendors selling newspapers, hot snacks, and items that travelers regret buying as soon as they step on the train. Technological advancements reached Springfield homes as well. Electric stoves replaced wood-burning ones. Radios brought news and entertainment into living rooms. Refrigerators slowly replaced iceboxes. Each new invention was initially met with a mixture of fascination and doubt. Springfield citizens had an admirable ability to be both amazed by technology and suspicious of it at the same time.
Cultural shifts accompanied these technological changes. Radio shows, jazz music, and traveling theater performances enriched Springfield's social life. Families gathered around radios to listen to nightly broadcasts. Dance halls filled with people enjoying new styles of music and movement. Community clubs offered lectures, card games, and organized debates about topics ranging from local politics to whether the new street lamps were too bright. Education also expanded dramatically during this era. New school buildings replaced older ones, offering larger classrooms, dedicated science rooms, and libraries stocked with books covering everything from world history to Springfield's own founding myth. Children studied under increasingly structured curricula that emphasized both academic knowledge and civic pride. Teachers encouraged critical thinking, though they also noticed that Springfield students had a unique talent for arguing about things that didn't need to be argued about. One of the defining developments of the early 20th century in Springfield was the rise of public works projects. The town invested in paved streets, sewer systems, expanded parks, and improved water infrastructure. These upgrades were not always smooth. Construction crews occasionally discovered unexpected underground obstacles, such as forgotten wells or large rocks that refused to move. But overall, the improvements made Springfield cleaner, safer, and more efficient. City planning committees formed to manage Springfield's rapid expansion. Their ideas were ambitious, but not always consistent. One committee prioritized expanding green spaces, another wanted more industrial growth, yet another insisted that Springfield needed more elaborate public fountains for reasons that remain unclear. As a result, Springfield's development pattern became a blend of logic and improvisation, a theme that would persist well into the future. Meanwhile, Springfield's rivalry with Shelbyville reached new levels of intensity. Both towns prided themselves on their growing industries, sports teams, and infrastructure achievements. They competed in agricultural fairs, business expositions, and school competitions. Even train schedules became a source of rivalry, with each town boasting that its trains were faster, cleaner, or less likely to explode. This competition kept both cities motivated and occasionally annoyed. Springfield's political scene during this period was lively. Campaigns featured colorful posters, elaborate speeches, and candidates with big ideas and even bigger confidence. Issues ranged from infrastructure improvements to education reform and regulation of factory work hours. Voter turnout was high, partly because residents believed strongly in civic duty and partly because political rallies offered free snacks. Socially, Springfield became increasingly diverse. Immigrant communities enriched the town with new cuisines, languages, traditions, and cultural festivals. These additions gave Springfield a multi-layered identity, a town that valued its traditions while embracing new influences. Neighborhoods developed distinct cultural flavors, each contributing to Springfield's growing vibrancy. Recreation expanded during this era as well. Springfield built public pools, sports fields, and community centers. Baseball became a favorite pastime, with local teams forming informal leagues that brought neighborhoods together. Parks became gathering spots for picnics, games, and community celebrations. The town's growing enthusiasm for outdoor events hinted at the spirited, sometimes chaotic public gatherings Springfield would later become known for. Springfield's business sector thrived as well. Locally owned shops lined busy streets, offering groceries, clothing, tools, and assorted goods. Restaurants and diners appeared, some of which became beloved institutions. Barbershops and beauty parlors served as social hubs where residents exchanged news, opinions, and gossip. These businesses formed the backbone of Springfield's middle class and helped define the town's character. Culturally, Springfield in the early 20th century was a blend of old and new. Residents continued celebrating traditions like Founders Day, which grew more elaborate with each passing decade. At the same time, they embraced new innovations like movies and radio shows. Springfield's theaters showed silent films and, later, talkies, drawing crowds eager to experience modern entertainment. Local actors formed small theater troupes that staged plays ranging from classic works to humorous performances written by Springfield residents. Another major shift during this era was Springfield's connection to national trends. As communication improved, Springfield's residents became more aware of events, fashions, and ideas from across the country. National movements in art, politics, and science influenced Springfield's local culture. This exposure broadened perspectives, encouraged new discussions, and occasionally prompted attempts to replicate big city trends with mixed results. As the First World War approached, Springfield citizens found themselves caught between the desire to stay focused on local concerns and the awareness that global events were beginning to influence daily life. Young men enlisted, industries adjusted to shifting economic demands, and families maintained a sense of unity during an uncertain time. Springfield supported national efforts while preserving its strong local identity. By the time Springfield entered the 1920s, it had transformed into a dynamic, industrious, culturally rich town, a place where tradition and progress lived side by side, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in friendly argument. The foundations laid in the late 19th and early 20th centuries would shape Springfield's development for decades to come. The next era would bring roaring prosperity, economic challenges, cultural evolution, and the early seeds of Springfield's future icon, the nuclear power plant. It would be a time of rapid change, bold ambition, and occasional missteps, all of which would become part of Springfield's long, complicated, and endlessly fascinating story.
By the early 1920s, Springfield had become a confident, bustling town with a growing sense of identity. Its industrial base was strong, its neighborhoods were expanding, and its citizens were increasingly aware that they lived in a place with a personality unlike any other town in the region. Springfield had survived early frontier hardships, embraced industrialization, and was now stepping into a new era marked by economic optimism, cultural vibrancy, and the kind of public enthusiasm that usually precedes both triumphs and regrettable decisions. The Roaring Twenties arrived in Springfield with as much excitement as the town could muster. New businesses opened along the main streets. Restaurants, cafes, general stores, and newly built department shops offered goods and services that excited Springfield residents. People had more leisure time, more disposable income, and more confidence that Springfield's prosperity would continue indefinitely. Music played a large role in this era. Jazz swept through Springfield's social scene, filling dance halls with energetic rhythms and encouraging residents to participate in new forms of dance that their grandparents quietly disapproved of. Young people embraced the lively cultural atmosphere, flocking to social clubs, movie theaters, and newly established radio lounges. Even older Springfield residents, though skeptical of the noise at first, eventually found themselves tapping their feet to the music during festivals. Technological advancement continued shaping Springfield life. Automobiles became increasingly common, replacing horse-drawn transportation, while early drivers struggled with narrow roads and occasionally misunderstood traffic rules, such as treating stop signs as polite suggestions rather than commands. The spread of cars marked a significant shift. Streets had to be widened, signs added, and new traffic ordinances created. Police officers, tasked with enforcing these rules, often had to explain them repeatedly and loudly. The radio revolution also transformed Springfield culture. Families gathered in living rooms to listen to news broadcasts, comedy shows, serialized dramas, and musical performances. Radio connected Springfield to the wider world, allowing residents to hear voices from distant cities and stay informed about national events. Local sponsors even aired Springfield native commercials, some of which were surprisingly creative, and some of which may have been written in a hurry. Springfield's industries prospered through the early 1920s. Factories expanded operations, producing goods for national markets. The textile mill added new machinery, the machinery workshops streamlined production, and several local food processing plants became known for their canned goods. Employment levels rose, attracting workers from surrounding towns. Yet, industrial success also came with environmental consequences. Smoke from factory chimneys darkened Springfield's skyline on busy days. The river collected runoff and waste that left an unpleasant odor during summer months. Citizens complained, but often while acknowledging the town wouldn't be thriving without its industries. Springfield's relationship with pollution was already becoming what it would be for decades: uneasy, persistent, and occasionally ignored. Springfield's architecture evolved during this period as well. The town invested in larger public buildings, schools with brick walls and tall windows, a grand post office, and expanded municipal offices. These structures signaled Springfield's ambitions. Residents were proud of these achievements and often pointed them out to visitors, especially those from Shelbyville. Town planners also experimented with new neighborhood layouts, though the results were mixed. Some areas became organized, tree-lined districts. Others became clusters of streets that twisted in shapes resembling question marks for reasons nobody could explain. As the 1920s reached their peak, Springfield enjoyed a cultural renaissance. Social gatherings became more elaborate, with seasonal festivals, parades, and theatrical performances drawing large crowds. Springfield's theater scene grew rapidly. Silent films were replaced by talkies, and cinemas became regular weekend destinations. Local actors formed drama clubs that staged plays in community halls, blending classical works with original pieces celebrating Springfield's history. Springfield's legendary rivalry with Shelbyville remained as lively as ever. Both towns competed in nearly anything imaginable: harvest fairs, baseball tournaments, marching band showcases, and even debates over which town produced superior apples. Neither town was willing to admit defeat, even when the competition involved something as trivial as which community had the cleaner sidewalks, an issue that produced heated discussions and 2 editorials. But beneath Springfield's energy and optimism, the winds of economic change were approaching. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, Springfield, like the rest of the country, felt the impact almost immediately. Factories reduced output as national demand dropped. Layoffs began, leaving many Springfield workers struggling to support their families. Businesses closed or scaled back operations. Families tightened budgets, planted victory gardens, and relied on community support. Springfield residents, known for their resilience, did not lose hope, but they did feel the uncertainty creeping into daily life. The Great Depression tested the town's unity. Community organizations stepped up, distributing food, clothing, and supplies to struggling families. Churches offered assistance, and neighbors helped one another however they could. Springfield's local government implemented modest relief programs. Though resources were limited, citizens appreciated every gesture of support.
Cultural life slowed, but it did not fade. Radio continued bringing entertainment to households, offering a temporary escape from economic hardship. Local clubs organized free events. Libraries extended hours to accommodate the increased demand for books, newspapers, and warmth. Despite economic difficulty, Springfield maintained its strong sense of identity. Its rivalry with Shelbyville even shifted slightly, becoming less about outshining each other and more about who could weather the crisis with greater dignity. though even then, arguments occasionally broke out about which town had the better unemployment relief committee. Throughout the 1930s, Springfield gradually adapted to its new reality. Industries recovered slowly, but Springfield's manufacturing base proved resilient. The agricultural sector remained stable, providing much-needed employment and food. Springfield's population held steady as families chose to stay rather than relocate. They believed in their town, trusted in its leadership, and took comfort in shared traditions that reminded them of better times. One unexpected development during these years came from local inventors and tinkerers. With more free time and fewer job opportunities, some Springfield residents pursued ambitious projects in garages, workshops, and barns. Some inventions were practical, others were imaginative, a few were questionable. While none reached national attention, these creations highlighted Springfield's creative spirit. By the late 1930s, Springfield began showing signs of renewed activity. Factories reopened shifts, businesses regained customers. New technological advancements, including stronger electrical infrastructure and improved machinery, arrived in Springfield. The economy stabilized. Families celebrated cautiously, grateful for progress, but mindful of the years they had endured. As Springfield entered the early 1940s, global events again influenced its destiny. The world was preparing for another conflict, and Springfield, despite its isolated appearance on the map, was once again connected to a broader, rapidly changing world. Springfield was about to enter the World War II era, a time of sacrifice, unity, industrial mobilization, and profound transformation. It would mark one of the most significant turning points in Springfield's entire history and lay the groundwork for the Springfield we know today. As Springfield entered the 1940s, the shadow of global conflict loomed large. Though Springfield often behaved like a world entirely unto itself, even this peculiar town could not avoid the effects of World War II. News arrived by radio, newspapers, and the occasional overly dramatic messenger convinced he was delivering information of national importance. Springfield listened, adjusted, and prepared for changes that would affect every household. The war fundamentally reshaped Springfield's industries. Factories shifted from peacetime production to manufacturing supplies needed for the war effort. Textile mills began producing uniforms and canvas materials. Machine shops refocused on parts needed for military equipment. Food processing plants increased output, supplying rations that found their way to soldiers abroad. Workers who had once made everyday goods now produced items intended for distant battlefields. The factories operated day and night. Springfield's skyline glowed with light from industrial windows, and the rhythmic hum of machines became the town's soundtrack. Workers filled long, demanding shifts. Families adjusted to new routines, coping with extended work hours and the absence of loved ones who enlisted. Springfield had always been a hard-working town, but wartime labor took that spirit to a new level. The town's men enlisted in large numbers. Young recruits boarded trains at the Springfield rail station, surrounded by families giving proud farewells filled with encouragement and worry. Though Springfield prided itself on being a close-knit community, wartime departures felt especially heavy. Families stayed strong, following the war's progress through radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines. Those who remained in Springfield supported the war in their own ways. Women stepped into jobs traditionally held by men, working in factories, offices, and transportation. Springfield's women organized supply drives, rolled bandages, and coordinated community support programs. Schools held fundraisers, and children collected scrap metal in campaigns that were occasionally more enthusiastic than organized. Teachers often had to remind students that scrap metal did not include school doorknobs. On the home front, rationing became part of daily life. Springfield residents adjusted to limits on sugar, gasoline, coffee, and other essentials. They grew victory gardens in backyards and empty lots, producing vegetables that supported household needs. Families preserved food, shared recipes, and invented creative substitutes when supplies ran low. In a town full of resourceful people, rationing became less of an inconvenience and more of a challenge that Springfield was determined to overcome. Community spirit flourished. Churches organized care packages for soldiers, neighborhoods held donation drives, town halls hosted meetings that addressed wartime policies and family support. Springfield's sense of unity grew stronger, reinforcing the deep bonds that had defined the town since its founding. Even the rivalry with Shelbyville softened temporarily, though only slightly. Both towns contributed proudly to the war effort, if only to prove that their contribution was larger. As the war progressed, Springfield experienced cultural shifts as well. Women's expanded roles in the workforce sparked discussions about gender expectations. Immigrant communities in Springfield formed support networks reflecting their own global connections. Radio broadcasts included international news, patriotic programming, and music that now reflected both hope and nostalgia. Springfield embraced big band music, pep rallies, and patriotic ceremonies that lifted morale.
Amid these changes, Springfield's institutions adapted quickly. Schools introduced wartime curriculum topics, teaching students geography, world events, and civic responsibility. Assemblies emphasized unity and sacrifice. Older students volunteered in local initiatives, from assembling care packages to collecting materials for recycling centers. These activities brought Springfield's young people together in a unique way, fostering a sense of citizenship that would last long after the war. Springfield's economy grew during the war years. High production demands meant factories operated at full capacity, providing stable employment. Skilled tradespeople found their expertise in high demand. Springfield's agricultural sector also benefited, supplying food to both local industries and national programs. The combined effect, manufacturing strength and agricultural output, made Springfield an essential part of the regional wartime economy. Still, the war brought emotional strains. Families anxiously awaited letters from loved ones overseas. Churches held vigils. The community watched casualty lists with heavy hearts. Though Springfield is often portrayed as a town full of comedic misfortunes, the war years were a sobering reminder that it was part of a much larger world. Victory in the war brought celebrations across Springfield. People gathered in the streets, waving flags, cheering and embracing neighbors. Factories sounded horns, churches rang bells, and radios played triumphant music. It was a moment of relief, pride, and profound unity. Springfield citizens felt their efforts had made a meaningful contribution, not just through those who served abroad, but through the tireless work done at home. In the years following the war, Springfield entered a period of optimism and reconstruction. Returning soldiers brought stories, experiences, and new perspectives. Many used education benefits to pursue college degrees or technical training. Others returned to their previous jobs, now changed by wartime technology and modernized processes. Springfield's industries transitioned back to civilian production, though many retained the advanced machinery adopted during the war. Manufacturing surged. The demand for consumer goods skyrocketed. Factories produced appliances, furniture, and everyday products for families eager to move forward after years of sacrifice. The population grew rapidly as Springfield entered the post-war baby boom. New families moved into the town's expanding neighborhoods. Rows of freshly built houses filled the outskirts of Springfield, each with neat lawns, porch lights, and optimistic homeowners looking toward the future. Commerce flourished. Springfield's downtown filled with shops selling clothing, groceries, appliances, toys, and almost anything a growing family could want.
Restaurants and diners multiplied, serving comfort foods to busy citizens. Movie theaters thrived, showing films that ranged from dramatic epics to new comedies that had residents laughing long after leaving the theater. Public infrastructure expanded. Schools built additional classrooms. Parks were renovated. Roads were improved, though Springfield's habit of unusual street layouts continued. The town invested in new community centers, public pools, and recreational facilities. These improvements marked Springfield's transition into a confident, solidly mid-century town. Culturally, Springfield embraced trends from across the country. Rock and roll, television shows, automobiles with sleek designs, and new fashions quickly influenced Springfield society. Families gathered around TV sets, amazed by the ability to watch moving images directly in their living rooms. Local teenagers adopted new styles of music and clothing, forming social circles that puzzled older generations. The post-war era also introduced more organized government structures. Springfield expanded municipal roles, creating departments responsible for public works, planning, education, and civic services. Leadership became more professionalized, though the town never fully lost its tendency to elect officials based on enthusiasm rather than experience. The rivalry with Shelbyville reignited strongly after the war. Both towns compared economic recovery, school systems, sports teams, and cultural events. Springfield citizens were determined to prove that their community had emerged stronger and more united from the war effort. Shelbyville, equally confident, made the same claim. The competition intensified across nearly every public event, from harvest festivals to marching band performances. Yet underneath the rivalry, both towns faced the same challenge: adapting to a rapidly modernizing America. Springfield needed to handle growing populations, increased automobile traffic, expanding industries, and new cultural expectations. The town's future depended on its ability to modernize effectively, while preserving the traditions and identity that made Springfield feel like home. As Springfield approached the 1950s, it stood at the brink of its most transformative century yet. New technologies, suburban expansion, corporate influence, and new cultural shifts were coming. Springfield was about to enter an era that would reshape everything, from its industries to its entertainment, from its neighborhoods to its public services. And soon, one of Springfield's most defining landmarks would rise on its landscape: the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. The next decades would bring both prosperity and unpredictability. But Springfield, fortified by its history and its people, was ready. Or at least as ready as Springfield ever gets. Following the booming post-war years, Springfield entered an era of remarkable change. Families settled into new suburban neighborhoods. Automobiles filled the streets, and television sets glowed in living rooms where once only lanterns existed. The town that once developed around agriculture and small-scale manufacturing now found itself increasingly defined by consumer culture, service industries, and the unmistakable hum of modern life. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Springfield embraced suburban expansion. Large lots, neat lawns, and rows of nearly identical houses became a common sight on the outskirts of town. This suburban growth brought new residents, many of whom were first- or second-generation families attracted by the promise of stable jobs, good schools, and a fresh start. These neighborhoods, though well-planned, still bore the unusual quirks that Springfield's geography and history produced. Curving streets in spite of grid plans, small parks with exaggerated names, and occasional houses built too close to the gorge that everyone decided to ignore. Consumer culture flourished in Springfield. Shopping centers emerged, malls opened, and chain stores arrived.
families visited appliance stores to purchase the latest conveniences: televisions, refrigerators, automatic washers, products that previous generations could only dream of. The town's downtown district adapted, with larger storefronts, neon signs, and new eateries offering both comfort and novelty. Springfield's economy shifted towards services, retail, and entertainment, reflecting its evolution into a post-industrial community. Television had an especially dramatic impact. Families gathered after dinner to watch programs that brought the world into their living rooms. Morning cartoons, nightly news, variety shows, the television became the new hearth. Springfield parents worried about what their children were watching, while children worried about what kind of snacks they would have during commercial breaks. Television ads promoted various products, some practical, some absurd. Springfield's residents embraced them all, renting movies, buying novelty items, and occasionally wondering why they owned a rocket-shaped egg cooker. The education system also evolved. Schools expanded further, built new wings, offered advanced subjects, and introduced extracurricular activities in a big way. Sports teams, debate clubs, drama programs, and science fairs became staples of Springfield high schools. Students learned not only about local history and civics responsibility, but also about global issues, technology, and careers beyond the town. Springfield's youth remained deeply connected to their hometown, yet their aspirations extended beyond city limits. Industrially, Springfield experienced both continuity and change. Manufacturing remained important, but many factories adapted to shifting economic conditions by diversifying production, automating processes, or repurposing space into service enterprises. Some older industrial sites were transformed into shopping centers or office buildings. Springfield thus began adapting to a new economic model, one rooted in local commerce, education, and cultural amenities rather than heavy industry alone. Urban planning in Springfield faced new challenges. The rise of automobile traffic required wider roads, parking lots, and improved traffic management. Infrastructure had to support not only the transport of goods, but also the daily commute of workers and the weekend activities of families. Public transit systems struggled. Trolley lines were reduced or eliminated. Bus routes were expanded. Streets that once echoed with horse-drawn carriage lights now flickered with neon and brake lights. Springfield's government fraternized with zoning boards, traffic committees, and neighborhood associations as the town adjusted to modern life. Neighborhood identity grew stronger during this era. Long-established families held block parties. New families sought to fit in while preserving their distinct backgrounds. Communities developed informal networks of neighborly support, local festivals, and friendly rivalries, some of which were continuations of the old Springfield-Shelbyville rivalry, now playing out in school sports, community awards, and which town had the better drive-in cinema. Culturally, Springfield became more nationally connected, but maintained a distinct local flavor. The town broadcast its own local radio and television stations. Local theaters hosted national touring acts. Newspapers ran columns about Springfield's history, upcoming events, and local characters. While Springfield citizens enjoyed the same trends as larger cities, rock music, fashion changes, and overseas travel, they still celebrated Founders Day with the same fervor and recounted legends of Jebediah Springfield with pride that sounded slightly louder than strictly necessary. One of the defining features of this era was the rise of large-scale, often corporate influences in Springfield's economy. National companies opened branches in town. Malls opened, became regional destinations. Local entrepreneurs adapted, selling specialized products, opening service businesses, and offering conveniences that matched modern expectations. Springfield's economic identity evolved from manufacturing first to consumer and service focused. Simultaneously, Springfield continued to embrace the quirks that made it uniquely Springfield. Local debates erupted over seemingly minor issues: the correct shade of mailbox paint, the placement of street lamps, and the fastest route to the Gorge Lookout. These debates often served as vehicles for larger concerns about identity, progress, and tradition. Springfield citizens argued passionately, politely, and with just enough stubbornness to make the next town meeting feel essential. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, national issues found local expression in Springfield, framed by Springfield's particular perspectives. For example, debates about pollution sometimes referenced the old factory stacks, the river's health, and whether the town was living up to its founding ideals. Environmental groups formed, advocating for cleaner water, better air quality, and preservation of Springfield's landscapes. These groups were often met with support, mild resistance, and a dose of that characteristic Springfield pragmatism. Yes, yes, but how much will it cost, and can we finish by dinner? Politically, Springfield's local government grew into its modern form. Departments for parks and recreation, public planning, and education became standard. Local elections often featured charismatic candidates promising progress, infrastructure upgrades, or more festivals honoring Jebediah Springfield. Civic engagement remained high. Voter turnout was strong. Citizens still believed their votes mattered, even when they were voting for the candidate who promised the same improvements his predecessor had promised. As the sandwich of decades pressed on, Springfield's identity matured. It was no longer merely a small town with big dreams. It was a town whose dreams had grown bigger than itself. Residents began reflecting on what kind of place Springfield was becoming: suburban sprawl or connected community, manufacturing hub or cultural center, family-friendly neighborhood or regional attraction. These questions did not always have easy answers, but they represented the kind of introspection Springfield rarely indulged in during its earliest years. The groundwork laid in these decades would carry Springfield into a future defined by major economic shifts, technological revolutions, and the emergence of landmarks, both physical and cultural, that would make Springfield recognizable far beyond its own borders. Everything, from the layout of its streets to the character of its festivals, had been influenced by the choices made in this era. Part 2. As Springfield moved toward the 1980s, its citizens continued to navigate change with the mix of pride, optimism, and mild exasperation that had always characterized their town. They believed in progress, they celebrated tradition, and they accepted that sometimes progress involved detours. As Springfield moved into the 1960s, it encountered a decade defined by dramatic cultural shifts, generational tension, and social change. Springfield, being Springfield, experienced these changes in ways both recognizable and uniquely characteristic. The town had already embraced television, automobiles, suburban expansion, and the growing influence of consumer culture. But now Springfield faced something new, a clash between traditional expectations and rapidly evolving modern values. The arrival of the baby boomer generation reshaped Springfield's social structure. Children born in the post-war years were now teenagers and young adults, ready to challenge norms their parents held on too tightly. They listened to new music, voiced new opinions, and questioned long-standing values. Springfield was no stranger to debate, but this new wave of cultural expression introduced tensions the town had not yet experienced. Music was one of the clearest indicators of the shift. Rock and roll took over Springfield's youth culture. Teenagers gathered around record players, attended local concerts, and formed garage bands that practiced loudly enough for entire neighborhoods to hear whether the neighborhood wanted it or not. Parents were uncertain about these new sounds. Some enjoyed them reluctantly, others declared them noise. A few insisted the music was a threat to society, though they offered little explanation beyond something about the beat. The 1960s also introduced significant political engagement among Springfield's younger residents. National movements inspired local activism. Students organized small demonstrations, circulated petitions, and participated in debates on social issues. Schools responded by updating curriculums to include contemporary history, government, and civic responsibility. The debates in Springfield's classrooms were lively, occasionally heated, and always loud.
At the same time, Springfield's suburban growth continued. Families moved into modern split-level homes with attached garages, backyard patios, and shiny household appliances. These new neighborhoods often had their own community associations, complete with newsletters, annual gatherings, and rules about lawn maintenance that some residents followed and others politely ignored. The town government responded to growth with expanded public services. Police and fire departments received updated equipment. Streets were widened, traffic signals increased, bus routes multiplied. Though improvements were welcome, Springfield's traffic problem grew worse. More cars meant more congestion, and Springfield's already complicated street layout was not built for the sheer number of vehicles appearing on the roads. Springfield's downtown district, once the center of all commerce, began facing competition from new shopping plazas and malls. These modern retail centers promised convenience, wide parking lots, and stores that sold everything from clothing to household goods under one roof. Families flocked to them, especially during weekends. Some traditional downtown shops struggled to compete, while others adapted by modernizing front stores and offering unique goods. Culturally, Springfield embraced the creative energy of the decade. New art galleries opened, showcasing local talent. Coffee houses hosted poetry readings, acoustic performances, and small theatrical acts. Young Springfield residents discovered literature that challenged their thinking and music that stirred new emotions. They experimented with self-expression through fashion, hairstyles, and art, much to the confusion of older generations who did not understand why shirts suddenly needed to have bright patterns. Springfield's immigrant communities also grew stronger, contributing to the town's diversity. Families introduced new food traditions, cultural celebrations, and languages to Springfield life. Restaurants offering different cuisines appeared, expanding the town's food culture beyond traditional American fare. Springfield residents, always eager to critique food, welcomed these additions enthusiastically.
One of the most important developments in Springfield during the 1960s was the rise of higher education and technical training. Community colleges and vocational programs expanded rapidly, providing opportunities for graduates seeking skilled professions. Springfield residents pursued careers in engineering, healthcare, manufacturing, and business administration. These programs helped Springfield build the workforce it needed for the next stage of technological advancement. As Springfield moved into the 1970s, the town experienced another wave of societal change. Economic shifts brought new challenges. Some factories faced reduced demand, leading to layoffs and uncertainty. Inflation affected businesses and families. Springfield's downtown saw further competition from shopping malls. And though Springfield's economy had been strong for decades, residents realized the need to diversify beyond traditional manufacturing. Yet, the 1970s also brought innovation. New businesses opened, focusing on electronics, automotive services, and emerging retail trends. Springfield residents embraced technology more fully, buying color televisions, advanced kitchen appliances, and later in the decade, early home video systems. Stores sold cassette players, tape recorders, and devices that Springfield families operated with both excitement and mild confusion. Springfield's environmental awareness also grew during this period. National environmental movements inspired local efforts. Citizens organized cleanup campaigns, planted trees, and advocated for improved waste management. The polluted river became a topic of concern, prompting discussions about water treatment and public health. Schools added environmental science to their curriculums. Springfield's young people pushed for sustainable practices, though translating enthusiasm into consistent action proved challenging at times. Local politics shifted as well. Candidates embraced modern campaign strategies, using television advertisements, campaign jingles, and community events to reach voters. Public debates attracted larger audiences. Issues like pollution, school funding, and urban development became major topics. Springfield citizens continued to vote passionately, even when campaigns featured more theatrics than policy. Springfield's culture grew increasingly eclectic. Fashion trends from around the world reached the town. Music expanded to include rock, funk, soul, and early hints of electronic styles. Springfield's teenagers lived through fads involving platform shoes, disco dance moves, and hairstyles that defied gravity. Older residents observed these choices with curiosity and occasional concern, wondering when hair would return to lying flat. The 1970s also witnessed a rise in recreational facilities. Roller rinks became popular weekend spots. Public pools saw record attendance. Bowling alleys thrived. Springfield families attended drive-in theaters during warm nights, enjoying movies from the comfort of their cars. Parks hosted picnics, sports games, and outdoor concerts that showcased local talent. Springfield's and Shelbyville's rivalry remained lively, but evolved into friendlier territory. Both towns now competed in arts festivals, academic contests, and business expositions. Though arguments still flared, the tone was less hostile and more humorous. Springfield residents prided themselves on winning contests based on creativity and community engagement, while Shelbyville emphasized efficiency and organization. Yet, amid all this cultural, technological, and social change, Springfield faced a looming transformation, one that would redefine the entire town for generations: the construction of the Springfield nuclear power plant. Plans for the nuclear facility began circulating in the late 1970s. Energy demands were rising, and nuclear power promised efficiency, modernity, and local jobs. The proposed plant attracted strong opinions from Springfield citizens. Supporters claimed that it would bring economic growth and technological leadership. Opponents expressed concerns about safety, environmental risks, and Springfield's track record of occasionally questionable decisions. Despite the debate, plans moved forward. The project promised hundreds of construction jobs and long-term employment for skilled workers. Local businesses anticipated growth. City officials promoted the plant as a symbol of Springfield's bright, modern future. But the decision to build the plant marked more than an infrastructure investment. It represented Springfield's transition into a fully modernized town, a place where science, technology, and industry would coexist with tradition, community identity, and just a bit of unpredictable chaos. By the end of the 1970s, Springfield stood on the edge of its most defining transformation yet. The decades ahead would introduce corporate influence, political complexity, environmental questions, and a level of public drama that would become uniquely Springfield.
As Springfield entered the late 1970s and early 1980s, the town stood at a critical crossroads. For decades, Springfield had relied on traditional manufacturing, agriculture, and a patchwork of medium-sized industries to sustain its economy. These sectors had carried Springfield through wars, population booms, cultural upheavals, and the unpredictable personality shifts of several town officials. But by the beginning of the 1980s, Springfield needed something more, something large, modern, efficient, and capable of powering the next stage of its evolution. Enter the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. The story of the plant's creation began several years before construction started. As Springfield's population grew and industries expanded, electrical demand surged. Blackouts became frustratingly common, usually arriving at the worst possible moments, during cooking, during televised sports events, or during particularly dramatic moments in soap operas. Springfield's old electrical grid, built for a much smaller and simpler town, struggled under the strain. Local politicians, recognizing an opportunity to modernize Springfield and perhaps attach their names to a major civic achievement, began exploring options. Committees were formed. Feasibility studies were commissioned. Proposals were drafted, revised, rejected, revised again, and occasionally lost. Some suggested expanding the existing electrical stations. Others proposed building a hydroelectric facility. A few residents offered more creative solutions, such as harnessing steam from the hot springs, or, in one case, attempting to install enormous solar mirrors on the hillside. But nuclear energy was the idea that gained traction, partly because it promised to generate reliable power, and partly because it seemed futuristic in a way Springfield found irresistible. By the mid-late 1970s, a consortium of business leaders, energy experts, and politicians united behind the proposal. The idea of Springfield as a nuclear-powered city of the future was advertised with glossy pamphlets depicting clean energy, smiling families, and skies free from pollution. These pamphlets did not depict traffic, accidents, or questionable hiring decisions, details Springfield would encounter later. The announcement of the nuclear project generated immediate excitement. Supporters claimed it would bring in hundreds of construction jobs, boost Springfield's economy, provide cheap, abundant electricity, modernize the town, create long-term employment for skilled technicians, raise Springfield's profile as a technologically advanced city. Springfield liked the sound of all of this. For many, it was a chance to leave behind the economic uncertainty of the 1970s and step boldly into the future. But not everyone was thrilled. Critics argued that nuclear power was risky. Springfield had a mixed history with large projects. Safety standards required strict discipline. Springfield citizens were not known for strict discipline. Environmental groups expressed concerns about waste disposal, pollution, and the long-term stability of the region's geology, especially considering Springfield's history of minor tremors, sinkholes, and landforms that occasionally defied basic physics. Opposition meetings were held, attended by activists, scientists, and residents who preferred their electricity generated by methods that were less likely to glow in the dark. But Springfield's leadership pushed forward. Construction began on a large plot of land just outside town. It quickly became one of the most ambitious and complex building projects in Springfield history. Hundreds of workers arrived daily to pour concrete, assemble framework, and install machinery that few citizens fully understood. The project created jobs, boosted local businesses, and filled Springfield with a sense of momentum. The construction site became a minor tourist attraction. Springfield residents watched from the sidelines as cranes lifted massive components into place. Children pointed excitedly at the rising cooling towers, unaware they would one day become the most recognizable feature of the town's skyline. Small concession stands even appeared near the site, selling snacks to curious observers. Springfield had always been an easily entertained town. Inside the offices overseeing construction, however, the atmosphere was more serious. Engineers debated structural integrity. Technicians examined safety protocols. Inspectors evaluated the plant's design against federal standards. Committees reviewed everything from emergency procedures to waste management. It was one of Springfield's first experiences with a complex regulatory environment, a system that demanded precision, documentation, and adherence to rules that Springfield's government found somewhat annoying. Still, progress moved steadily. The cooling towers rose. The reactor buildings took shape. Electrical infrastructure expanded across Springfield, updating old lines and installing new ones. Skilled workers arrived from across the region, bringing expertise and experience. Springfield locals trained for new technical roles, excited by the opportunity to secure stable careers. By the early 1980s, the plant neared completion. Rumors circulated about who might run it. The town hoped for someone competent, reliable, and calm. Someone who understood nuclear physics, maintained high safety standards, and respected Springfield's unique culture. In other words, Springfield hoped for someone the opposite of what they would soon get. With political connections playing a quiet but unquestionable role, Charles Montgomery Burns and his company acquired control of the plant. Mr. Burns, a wealthy industrialist whose business interests spanned everything from manufacturing to real estate, was known for his frugal management style and for his ability to look sternly disappointed at almost anything. For reasons that remain unclear, Springfield's leadership approved him without much resistance.
Under Burns's management, the final phases of construction moved swiftly, possibly too swiftly, and Springfield prepared for the grand opening of its new power source. The day the plant went online was treated as a major civic event. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held, featuring speeches from politicians who claimed full credit for the project and none of the responsibility. Families gathered outside to watch the symbolic first ignition. A brass band played upbeat music. Vendors sold commemorative snacks shaped vaguely like cooling towers. Springfield celebrated the arrival of nuclear power with the same enthusiasm it brought to festivals, parades, and half-off grocery sales. Once operational, the plant immediately became the backbone of Springfield's electrical grid. Lights glowed more reliably. Blackouts became rare. Local businesses expanded hours. Homes adopted technologies that demanded more power. Springfield's world grew brighter, sometimes literally. But almost immediately, the town began learning what it meant to have a nuclear plant run by Springfield's workforce and Mr. Burns's management style. Safety protocols were often treated as suggestions. Equipment maintenance occasionally lagged. Decisions about staffing were creative. And the selection of certain employees raised eyebrows among those who had been hoping for a slightly more disciplined approach. Yet, despite these quirks, Springfield embraced its new era. The presence of the nuclear plant changed the town's economic landscape. Real estate values shifted, job opportunities increased, neighborhoods grew, schools updated their technology programs. Springfield transformed from a mid-sized industrial town into a modern, energy-powered city with a distinct technological identity. And whether Springfield realized it or not, the nuclear plant had become one of the most defining elements of its character, a symbol of progress, controversy, eccentricity, and occasionally glowing wildlife. When the Springfield nuclear power plant officially entered full operation, it became immediately clear that the facility would influence every corner of the town's identity, from its economy to its environment, from political debates to daily life. And, in true Springfield fashion, the result was a combination of impressive ambition and puzzling decisions. At first, the mere presence of the plant created a boom in employment. Jobs ranged from engineering positions to maintenance roles to administrative duties. Springfield residents applied eagerly. Many were thrilled to be part of something scientific, even if they weren't entirely sure what that meant. Training programs were established, though the quality of these programs varied, and some employees seemed to learn by trial and error, a phrase never ideal when associated with nuclear energy. The most notable hire at the plant was Homer Simpson, whose employment would later become central to Springfield's cultural narrative. At this early point, however, Homer was simply one of hundreds of workers brought on to keep the massive facility running. His role as a safety inspector would prove that Springfield had unusual definitions of qualified. Under Mr. Burns's leadership, the plant quickly developed a reputation for having flexible safety standards.
Burns, motivated by profit and famously dismissive of rules that interfered with profit, prioritized cost efficiency above all else. Maintenance budgets were trimmed, protective equipment was reused past expiration dates, warning lights were ignored, and inspectors who raised concerns were often reassigned to departments where their voices could not disturb the peace, such as long-term storage rooms or entirely fictional positions. This did not go unnoticed by Springfield's residents. Rumors of glowing fish in nearby waters began circulating. Strange odors drifted across town on windy days. The occasional small tremor caused households to wonder whether it was natural geology or a reactor hiccup. Springfield's newspaper published articles expressing concern, while the local government attempted to reassure the public that everything was under control. The reassurances were not entirely convincing. Still, despite its flaws, the plant remained the primary power source for Springfield. It provided jobs, stimulated the economy, and powered new developments. Suburban districts expanded. Businesses stayed open longer. Schools adopted electronic equipment. Entire neighborhoods grew up in the shadow of the cooling towers, which loomed above the town like monuments to both progress and mild anxiety. Politically, the plant became a magnet for controversy. Environmental groups scrutinized its operations. Opposition leaders called for oversight hearings, improved safety protocols, and in some cases, shutting down the plant entirely. Mr. Burns responded to criticism with a mix of irritation, dismissal, and creative attempts to distract the public, ranging from sponsorships of local events to dramatic speeches about the importance of economic growth. City council meetings became battlegrounds filled with charts, questions, raised voices, and occasionally donuts brought by attendees hoping to improve the tone. Debate over the plant shaped Springfield's political climate for decades, influencing local elections, newspaper editorials, and conversations in diners across town. Economically, however, Springfield thrived from the plant's presence. The facility generated not only electricity, but also business opportunities. Restaurants, shops, and service providers around the plant's vicinity grew rapidly. Housing developments were built to accommodate workers. Skilled technicians moved into town, increasing demand for schools, healthcare, and entertainment. Springfield's population rose steadily, and the town, while still chaotic in its own special way, became livelier and more diverse.
Culturally, the plant became an iconic part of Springfield's image. Its cooling towers appeared in postcards, sketches, and art made by local students. It featured prominently in Springfield's skyline and became one of the most recognizable structures in the state. Locals even developed a kind of pride in the plant, an attitude best described as, "We know it's not perfect, but it's ours." Yet, the environmental consequences continued to accumulate. Reports surfaced of unusual plant growth in certain areas, fish displaying odd colors, and wildlife behaving unpredictably. Some residents claimed their lawn furniture glowed faintly at night. Others insisted these were exaggerations, though they usually said so while quickly checking their lawns. Springfield's river, which had long suffered from industrial pollution, now faced additional challenges from nuclear runoff. Cleanup efforts were inconsistent, underfunded, or performed by teams with questionable experience. At times, environmental regulators intervened, issuing fines or mandates for improvements. Burns responded to these interventions with his trademark combination of annoyance, denial, and attempts to find loopholes. Despite controversies, the nuclear plant soon became inseparable from Springfield's identity. Children learned about nuclear energy in school, families discussed plant news at dinner, local comedians used the plant as a frequent subject of jokes. Springfield's reputation as a nuclear-powered town spread beyond its borders, attracting both curiosity and skepticism from neighboring communities. The plant's influence even shaped Springfield's physical infrastructure. Roads leading to the facility were widened, emergency systems were updated, though not always tested, Warning sirens were installed around town, prompting occasional drills that often confused residents who weren't sure whether the sound indicated a practice run, a malfunction, or a sale at the Quickie Mart. Socially, plant employees formed a distinct community within Springfield. They gathered at bars after long shifts, shared stories of workplace incidents, and supported each other through the frustrations of their unusual jobs. Families of plant workers bonded at neighborhood events, creating a strong social network among those who lived closest to the facility. As the decades progressed, Springfield's economy diversified somewhat, but the plant remained its most significant employer. Other industries rose and fell: television studios, malls, factories, farms, but the nuclear plant stayed at the center, for better or worse. The town's reliance on the facility gave Mr. Burns substantial influence, allowing him to shape local policies and public attitudes. At the same time, Springfield's society grew increasingly dynamic. Television, globalization, and shifting cultural values influenced every aspect of life. Families raised children in a town that mixed tradition with modernity, routine with unpredictability. Schools updated curricula to address new technologies, including nuclear science, though lessons often had to clarify what was scientifically accurate and what was simply how Springfield did things. The plant's presence also influenced Springfield's demographics. Skilled workers brought families from other regions, expanding Springfield's cultural landscape. New neighborhoods formed around the plant, filled with families drawn by stable employment. Shops, restaurants, and parks grew to serve them. Springfield became a melting pot of backgrounds, accents, and perspectives, all living under the shadow of the cooling towers. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Springfield's identity solidified. It was no longer just an industrial town or a post-war suburb. It was now unmistakably Springfield, a nuclear-powered city with a unique blend of ambition, eccentricity, controversy, and community spirit. The town had entered a new chapter, one defined by modern energy, modern challenges, and the unmistakable feeling that the future would be as unpredictable as ever. Despite its flaws, despite glowing wildlife, and despite the occasional small-scale meltdown scare, Springfield remained a proud, resilient community. The nuclear plant had become the town's beating heart, sometimes steady, sometimes erratic, always unmistakable. The next era would see Springfield face new technologies, expanding media influence, shifting politics, and the cultural renaissance that would define it into the 21st century.
By the time Springfield reached the late 20th century, roughly the 1980s into the early 1990s, the town had fully entered an era defined by media influence, political theatrics, cultural reinvention, and rapid suburban expansion. It was a time when Springfield was no longer just a quirky nuclear-powered town, but an increasingly complex community balancing tradition with modern demands, nostalgia with innovation, and order with whatever Springfield usually does instead of order. The rise of television reshaped everything. Springfield had long enjoyed radio and early TV broadcasts, but the late 20th century brought a media explosion unlike anything the town had experienced. Color TVs had become household staples, and families gathered nightly around their sets, watching sitcoms, dramas, and news reports featuring anchors with serious voices and hair that defied natural movement. Local television stations flourished. Springfield's very own Channel 6 became a central part of daily life, offering news, local interest programs, and advertisements that citizens could recite by heart. Anchors like Kent Brockman gained celebrity status within the town, delivering news with a blend of authority and subtle exasperation, a tone that suited Springfield perfectly. People trusted Brockman's commentary
even when it occasionally drifted into exaggeration, speculation, or dramatic declarations about the downfall of society. Entertainment programming grew as well. Talk shows, game shows, and children's cartoons filled the airwaves, shaping Springfield's culture in ways both intentional and accidental. Commercials showcased new products, new restaurants, and new businesses, most of which promised innovation, convenience, or life-changing experiences, though Springfield residents learned to be skeptical about any promises involving revolutionary breakthroughs. Meanwhile, Springfield's population continued to expand. Suburbs stretched farther out, forming a patchwork of neighborhoods with distinctive architectural styles and personality traits. Some areas were filled with modern homes and trimmed lawns, while others developed in ways Springfield's planners could only describe as unexpected. A few subdivisions appeared in places that might have been better left undeveloped, too close to rivers, too near steep hillsides, or on top of fragile geological formations. Yet people moved into these homes anyway, trusting that Springfield's charm outweighed minor engineering concerns. Shopping malls grew into key social hubs. Springfield Mall offered retail stores, arcades, food courts, and seasonal decorations that drew families year-round. Teenagers wandered its halls in packs, forming friendships and memories while browsing clothing stores or spending weekends at the arcade. For many Springfield residents, the mall wasn't just a place to shop, it was a miniature social ecosystem. At the same time, Springfield's downtown district evolved, adapting to consumer trends. Some businesses modernized storefronts and expanded services. Others faded as the pull of the mall grew stronger. Coffee shops, small diners, and specialty stores added variety to downtown streets, fostering a more eclectic atmosphere that appealed to Springfield's artistic and creative residents. Culturally, Springfield embraced the energy of the era. Music changed rapidly, with influences from rock, pop, hip-hop, metal, and emerging electronic styles. Local radio stations played an eclectic mix of genres, and Springfield's youth gravitated to different musical identities. Record stores became meeting points for music lovers, and local bands performed in small venues, dreaming of fame that usually stayed just out of reach. The town's art scene also flourished. Community theaters staged ambitious productions. Small galleries displayed work from local painters, illustrators, and sculptors. Schools encouraged creative expression through music programs, drama clubs, and art competitions. Springfield, always a town with personality, leaned fully into artistic experimentation, sometimes producing impressive work, sometimes producing strange pieces that left residents quietly puzzled. Politically, Springfield embraced a form of civic involvement that could best be described as dramatic. Local elections drew high turnout and lively debate. Candidates made bold promises, from expanding public safety to revitalizing neighborhoods to reducing taxes without reducing services, a mathematical paradox Springfield voters accepted with surprising optimism. Campaign strategies became theatrical. Commercials aired on Channel 6 with catchy jingles, yard signs multiplied across neighborhoods. Town hall debates drew large crowds, sometimes more interested in the spectacle than the substance. Springfield's political climate balanced seriousness with spectacle, creating a system where leaders were expected not only to address issues, but also to entertain. Public issues grew increasingly complicated. Traffic congestion, school funding, environmental concerns, property development, and zoning disputes dominated political agendas. Springfield residents, always vocal, attended public meetings in large numbers, sharing opinions ranging from highly researched arguments to observations beginning with, "Well, back in my day." Still, Springfield kept trying and took pride in the effort
even when results varied. Meanwhile, Springfield's relationship with the nuclear power plant deepened. The facility remained the town's largest employer and economic anchor. Entire neighborhoods relied on the plant for income. Local businesses depended on plant workers for customers. And politically, the plant's influence extended far beyond its fences. Mr. Burns wielded significant power in local affairs, shaping decisions through quiet persuasion, strategic donations, and the occasional pointed reminder that the plant powered everything from streetlights to the mayor's office coffee maker.
Environmental issues, however, persisted. Concerns about pollution, strange wildlife behaviors, and occasional emergency sirens spurred public debates. Environmental groups organized marches and petitions. Scientists requested more oversight. Local officials acknowledged concerns but struggled to enforce changes against a company as influential as Burns. As a result, Springfield developed a unique relationship with environmental issues, acknowledging them, worrying about them, and then often carrying on as usual. Education improved during this era, at least in structure. Schools adopted new textbooks, computer equipment, and revised curriculums. Standardized testing became more prominent. Guidance counselors promoted college, trades, and career readiness. Still, schools faced overcrowding, funding shortages, and inconsistent results. Challenges typical of growing mid-sized towns navigating rapid change. Sports became an increasingly important part of Springfield culture. High school teams attracted dedicated fans. Local clubs organized recreational leagues for children and adults. Competitions with Shelbyville grew ever more intense, as sports rivalry offered a healthy, usually, outlet for Springfield's competitive spirit. Socially, Springfield became more diverse and interconnected. Immigrant families brought new traditions, restaurants, and cultural events. Springfield residents embraced these additions enthusiastically, enjoying new foods, holidays, and customs. Neighborhoods blended with a sense of shared identity, maintaining Springfield's character as an eclectic and welcoming town. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the rise of mass media and global connectedness influenced Springfield in ways that would shape the next century. Television delivered international news. Cable networks expanded entertainment options. Home video rentals changed how families enjoyed movies. Springfield kids grew up with media that broadened their worldviews, even when their town felt a little suspended in time. By the early 1990s, Springfield had become unmistakably modern. It was a town defined by its nuclear plant, its media landscape, its political theatrics, and its cultural diversity. Its streets bustled with suburban families, plant workers, small business owners, and teenagers armed with skateboards and opinions. It was lively, messy, proud, uncertain, and endlessly fascinating. Everything Springfield had always been, but magnified by the energy of a new era. Yet, as the century drew to a close, Springfield faced new challenges. Globalization, technological change, political shifts, and the rise of the internet, all forces that would pull the town into a new millennium filled with opportunity, conflict, and unexpected evolution. As Springfield advanced through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, it entered a period of accelerated change. Technologies evolved at dizzying speed. National culture shifted constantly. And Springfield, never known for stability, embraced this era with enthusiasm, confusion, and the occasional questionable decision.
What emerged was a town redefining itself while still clinging fiercely to the familiar rhythms and eccentricities that had shaped it for generations. By this time, television had become Springfield's unofficial town square. Families no longer gathered solely around dinner tables for conversation. They gathered around glowing screens showing everything from sitcoms to sensational news. Local commercials became memorable cultural artifacts. Kids quoted cartoon characters, while adults developed strong opinions about local anchors they had never met in person. A catchy jingle or slogan could spread through Springfield faster than any official announcement. Channel 6 grew into a dominant force. Reporting blended serious journalism with theatrics. Kent Brockman, always dramatic, delivered breaking news with the solemnity of someone announcing a national emergency. Even when reporting on trivial events, like a new donut shop opening or a cloud shaped vaguely like the founder's profile. Meanwhile, investigative reporters dug into local scandals, uncovering enough shady dealings, mismanagement, and questionable business practices to fill an entire season of documentaries. Springfield's embrace of mass media didn't stop with television. Cable channels, although confusing at first, dramatically widened Springfield's entertainment universe. Families discovered educational programming, movies, music channels, and late-night infomercials advertising products nobody needed, but many Springfield residents reluctantly tried anyway. The arrival of home video rentals changed Springfield life too. Video stores became weekend hotspots where families browsed aisles of VHS tapes, debated movie choices, and sometimes discovered that every copy of the film they wanted was checked out. This inconvenience became a Springfield tradition. Music culture exploded. The 1990s brought a wave of genres: grunge, hip-hop, pop, metal, and alternative rock. Springfield youth adopted these styles with enthusiasm, wearing flannel shirts, oversized jeans, band t-shirts, and hairstyles that Springfield's older residents observed with mixed emotions. Local bands formed, hoping to achieve fame, but usually settling for performances at school dances or the back rooms of small restaurants. Meanwhile, Springfield's economic structure continued shifting. Some long-running factories faced challenges from global competition and automation. Jobs were lost in certain sectors, creating anxiety among families tied to traditional manufacturing. At the same time, new types of businesses emerged: tech repair shops, electronic stores, expanded service industries, and new restaurants catering to diverse tastes. Springfield's economy, though unstable at times, adapted through reinvention and the town's unwavering habit of muddling forward through adversity. Springfield Mall remained a cultural anchor, evolving into a multi-level shopping ecosystem with chain stores, specialty shops, seasonal decorations, and food court staples. Teenagers spent hours wandering the brightly lit interior, forming social circles, discovering new fashion trends, and occasionally getting into mild trouble under the surveillance of mall security guards who took their jobs extremely seriously.
While commerce flourished in the suburbs, downtown Springfield experienced both revitalization efforts and periods of decline. Some blocks grew into eclectic districts with coffee shops, antique stores, and second-hand shops, attracting artists, college students, and free spirits. Other blocks struggled with vacancies as businesses migrated to larger commercial centers. Springfield's leaders repeatedly promised downtown renewal projects, some successful, some not, but the district maintained its unique charm regardless. Politically, the late 20th century was one of Springfield's most intense periods.
Elections became full-scale productions, complete with televised debates, campaign attack ads, lawn sign battles, slogans printed on everything from balloons to coffee mugs, and candidates making dramatic promises without clear plans. Springfield voters showed remarkable engagement, attending rallies and town halls with enthusiasm. Issues ranged from school reform to environmental protection to whether Springfield should ban certain types of fountain drinks. Candidates used humor, fear, nostalgia, or optimism, depending on their strategy, and Springfield voters reacted to all of it with equal parts excitement and skepticism. One of the central political issues remained the nuclear power plant. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it was at the center of repeated safety concerns, whistleblower claims, and calls for oversight. Environmental organizations protested outside the plant gates. Scientists demanded improved regulation. Mr. Burns dismissed critics as alarmists and continued operating the facility with emphasis on profit and minimal emphasis on anything involving protective gear. This tension contributed significantly to Springfield's political landscape. Local leaders navigated a delicate balance between relying on the plant's economic benefits and addressing legitimate concerns from citizens who noticed fish glowing in the dark and occasional odd readings on basement Geiger counters. Meanwhile, the town's cultural diversity continued to expand. New waves of immigration brought fresh cuisines, traditions, and celebrations to Springfield. Neighborhoods blended into lively mosaics of different backgrounds. Restaurants offering international dishes appeared along Springfield's main streets, adding depth to the town's food culture and giving residents endless new places to critique or praise enthusiastically. Churches, synagogues, temples, and community centers all expanded their roles supporting immigrant families and fostering intercultural connection. Festivals grew increasingly vibrant, showcasing music, dance, art, and food from across the world. Springfield residents eagerly participated, celebrating any holiday that offered good company, good food, or even an excuse to skip errands for the day. Schools adapted to Springfield's evolving demographics. Teachers incorporated multicultural material into lessons. Students learned about global history, civic engagement, and modern science, while still receiving enthusiastic, though occasionally embellished, instruction about Springfield's founding. Extracurricular programs flourished. Sports teams, debate clubs, arts programs, and science fairs all saw increased participation. Technologically, Springfield slowly entered the digital age. Home computers began appearing in households, bulky, slow, noisy machines that Springfield residents viewed with awe and slight confusion. Schools installed early computer labs, teaching students typing, basic software use, and how to avoid accidentally breaking expensive equipment. Public libraries added computer stations, attracting curious residents and early adopters. Some Springfield citizens embraced technology wholeheartedly. Others approached it cautiously, fearing their microwaves might one day become self-aware. Regardless, Springfield was now plugged in. The early days of the internet transformed Springfield even further. At first, the internet seemed like a novelty, a place for emails, chat rooms, and slow-loading pages. But by the late 1990s, businesses began creating websites, schools incorporated online research, and teenagers discovered the vast virtual world beyond their town borders. Springfield's digital revolution began quietly but grew rapidly, setting the stage for the monumental cultural shifts of the new millennium. Through all of this, Springfield's rivalry with Shelbyville continued in full force. Both towns competed over economic growth, school test scores, sports championships, and even which town's websites looked more modern. Both insisted that their town's culture was superior, even as residents regularly crossed borders to shop or visit family. By the end of the 1990s, Springfield stood transformed. It had become a media-saturated town, a cultural patchwork, a political hotspot, an economic survivor, a technological newcomer, a suburban hub, and still, unmistakably, Springfield. It was a place where past and present collided,
where traditions met modernity and where the nuclear plant's glow cast both literal and metaphorical light on the town below. As Springfield approached the new millennium, it was on the brink of yet another reinvention. The digital age, globalization, and rapid technological innovation promised to reshape the town in ways its founders could not have imagined, though Jebediah Springfield would likely claim he foresaw all of it anyway.
As Springfield stepped into the new millennium, it carried with it decades of growth, eccentricity, and cultural transformation. The 2000s arrived with the promise of progress and the uncertainty of a rapidly changing world. Springfield, as always, navigated this new era in its own special way, enthusiastically, imperfectly, and occasionally with both feet firmly planted in confusion. Yet, no matter how chaotic the times became, Springfield adapted, because adapting was something it had been quietly doing for generations. The early 2000s brought the full force of the digital revolution into Springfield. By now, computers were no longer rare novelties. Homes had desktops with towering monitors and loud cooling fans. Schools integrated technology more formally, offering computer classes that taught students how to type, navigate basic software, and avoid downloading suspicious files that might cause the machine to hiss or freeze. Public libraries expanded their computer labs, drawing in teenagers researching school projects, adults applying for jobs, and seniors determined to understand this email thing everyone talked about. Internet cafes appeared, becoming social hubs where Springfield residents sipped coffee, checked messages, and occasionally printed documents at the worst possible moment, such as when the printer ran out of ink halfway through a 20-page report. Businesses embraced the internet as well. Springfield restaurants created early, clunky websites. Local shops experimented with online advertising. Some ambitious entrepreneurs launched websites selling Springfield-made goods, though they quickly discovered that shipping costs often confused customers. Meanwhile, the mobile phone revolution transformed daily life. At first, phones were simple devices used for calls and text messages. But soon, new models arrived with cameras, play buttons, and eventually internet access. Springfield citizens marveled at the convenience, though some expressed concern about children spending too much time staring at small glowing screens rather than paying attention to homework, chores, or whether the stove was still on. The arrival of smartphones in the late 2000s changed Springfield overnight. Suddenly, information, communication, entertainment, and distraction were all available in the palm of one's hand. Social gatherings increasingly involve people scrolling through screens and showing each other pictures of pets, meals, or humorous mishaps. Local businesses began advertising through social media. Schools debated how to handle phone use, and Springfield's older residents, though initially skeptical, eventually adopted smartphones for weather alerts, video calls, and, in some cases, mobile games they denied playing. The internet brought globalization into Springfield's daily life. International products, cuisines, and entertainment became commonplace. Streaming services allowed residents to watch movies and shows instantly, ending the era of worrying whether the video rental store had a film in stock. Springfield teenagers discovered online communities centered around gaming, music, fan art, and hobbies, connections that stretched across continents. Yet despite these global influences, Springfield remained proudly Springfield. Its local culture persisted, shaped by long-standing traditions, the nuclear plant's glow, and the unique rhythm of life that had defined the town since its founding. Economically, the new millennium was a mixed bag. Some industries struggled against global competition, while others adapted successfully. Service sector jobs grew significantly. Restaurants, retail stores, health services, auto shops, and entertainment venues thrived. Springfield Mall continued to evolve, adding stores, attractions, and seasonal events that drew large crowds. Though the mall's aging infrastructure occasionally reminded visitors that it was built during an earlier era. However, downtown Springfield experienced a gradual revitalization. New cafes, boutique shops, art studios, and renovated office spaces injected energy into previously struggling blocks.
Young professionals, artists, and entrepreneurs began choosing downtown as their base of activity. Murals appeared on brick walls. Outdoor seating at cafes became common. The district hosted festivals, outdoor concerts, and cultural events that attracted residents from all over town. Springfield's political landscape adapted to the new millennium with a blend of modernization and tradition. Candidates embraced digital campaigning, launching websites and email newsletters. Political debates were televised with higher production quality. Campaign promises focused on technology, sustainability, and economic development, though Springfield voters still appreciated classic issues like pothole repair and property tax arguments. New political tensions emerged between generations. Younger residents advocated for climate action, improved public transportation, and social reforms. Older residents prioritized local traditions, public safety, and fiscal caution. Springfield's political discussions grew more complex, shaped by national trends, technological shifts, and the lasting influence of corporate actors, including, inevitably, Mr. Burns. Through it all, the Springfield nuclear power plant remained at the center of local debate. Environmental activists pushed for reduced emissions and safer protocols. Regulators periodically investigated mishaps. Workers navigated long shifts, outdated manuals, and occasional mysteries involving pipes that hadn't been labeled in decades. Burns maintained his grip on plant operations, resisting reforms with the same determination he had shown since acquiring the facility. Yet the plant continued powering Springfield, providing jobs and economic stability. It remained both a blessing and a burden, a source of pride, frustration, jokes, controversy, and glowing wildlife sightings that persisted far into the 2000s. Culturally, Springfield embraced the diversity that had been growing for decades. New restaurants served food from every corner of the world. Festivals celebrated different cultures, traditions, and heritage. Springfield's older customs like Founders Day and local fairs now blended with global influences, creating a uniquely vibrant town.
Sports remained central to community life. Local teams attracted enthusiastic crowds. Schools advanced athletic programs. Recreational leagues expanded, bringing families together for games, practices, and weekend events. Rivalry with Shelbyville intensified in this era, especially as both towns boasted larger populations and fiercely loyal fans. Education continued modernizing. Schools adopted new textbooks, technology, and teaching approaches. Computer labs expanded. Teachers incorporated multimedia lessons. Students used digital tools alongside traditional ones. Though Springfield schools still faced budget limitations, overcrowded classrooms, and the lively personalities of Springfield youth. Public infrastructure adapted as well. Road improvements, upgraded water systems, and new public facilities appeared throughout town. Although, as usual, some projects went smoother than others. A few construction efforts stalled, suffered budget overruns, or resulted in features nobody had requested, such as decorative fountains placed in confusing traffic spots. Environmentally, Springfield launched new sustainability initiatives. Recycling programs expanded, parks were renovated, community gardens gained popularity, local organizations promoted conservation. Citizens participated with varying degrees of enthusiasm, ranging from passionate activism to, "I will recycle as long as the bin isn't too far away." Meanwhile, Springfield's social life evolved with the rise of digital communication. Neighborhood communities expanded online through forums, blogs, and social networks. Information spread faster, sometimes accurate, sometimes wildly speculative. Rumors traveled across Springfield at unprecedented speed, which did nothing to stabilize the town's already lively gossip culture. Through all these changes, Springfield remained resilient. Newcomers continued arriving. Longtime residents passed traditions to younger generations. Businesses adapted, schools adjusted, Families built new lives while holding on to the familiar rhythms of Springfield's strange but beloved community. By the end of the 2000s, Springfield stood fully in the digital age. Connected, diverse, energetic, and always on the verge of something unexpected. The town was no longer just reacting to change, it was shaping its own future. The next stage of that future would be defined by smartphones, social media, streaming culture, shifting demographics, and new waves of economic and political challenges. Springfield was about to enter a new era filled with growth, tension, opportunity, and more than a few surprises. But then again, Springfield had always had a talent for surprises. As Springfield transitioned from the 2000s into the 2010s, the town found itself navigating a world defined by smartphones, instant communication, and an increasingly interconnected global culture. The pace of change quickened. New technologies appeared rapidly, reshaping how Springfield residents lived, worked, socialized, and even argued. And while Springfield had always been a place where tradition and chaos coexisted, the digital revolution added an entirely new dimension to the town's evolution. The smartphone era deepened its influence on Springfield life. What began as devices for communication quickly evolved into fully functioning tools for entertainment, work, shopping, navigation, and social connection. Residents used their phones for everything: checking weather forecasts, messaging friends, watching videos, listening to music, paying bills, and posting photos of pets or meals. Springfield's youth adopted smartphones fastest. Teenagers navigated apps effortlessly, documenting their lives through social media platforms. They formed online friend groups, participated in challenges, and created memes that spread across the town before older generations even learned what a meme was. Parents struggled to keep up, urging children to put down their phones during dinner while secretly checking notifications under the table. Businesses adapted to this new digital landscape. Restaurants offered online menus, mobile ordering, and delivery services. Shops developed social media profiles to promote discounts or new arrivals. Springfield Mall introduced digital gift cards and apps to track events. Even long-standing businesses from the pre-internet era embraced modern marketing, posting deals and photos that caught the attention of younger consumers. Meanwhile, Springfield's media environment expanded dramatically. Channel 6 remained a fixture, but streaming services, online news, and independent digital creators competed for residents' attention. Springfield citizens could now choose from thousands of entertainment options: documentaries, sitcoms, movies, sports, and even niche channels dedicated to topics like classic television or unusual pets. However, the rise of social media led to a new kind of cultural dynamic, one where information spread rapidly, sometimes accurate, sometimes wildly speculative. Rumors traveled through Springfield at unprecedented speed. Debates flared online, mixing legitimate concerns with spectacular misunderstandings. Local scandals, neighborhood disputes, and minor political controversies found second lives on the internet, often exaggerated by a spiral of reposts and dramatic commentary.
Nevertheless, Springfield benefited from digital transformation. Community organizations used social platforms to coordinate events, share volunteer opportunities, and promote charity drives. Schools communicated with families through email and online portals. Civic information became easier to access and easier to critique. Economically, Springfield experienced both growth and restructuring. Traditional manufacturing continued to decline due to automation and global competition, but new industries emerged. Technology repair shops thrived, catering to residents' phones and computers. Healthcare services expanded. Restaurants multiplied, fueled by Springfield's growing appreciation for diverse cuisines. Fitness centers, entertainment venues, and specialty retailers adapted to meet new consumer trends. The dawn of the 2020s brought Springfield into one of the most unusual and transformative periods in its long and unpredictable history. The world was changing at a speed Springfield had never experienced before. Technology accelerated, culture shifted, and social expectations evolved. Everyone carried a smartphone. Every store had an online presence, and every Springfield resident seemed to have at least one opinion on everything, which, to be fair, had always been true. But now the town faced challenges and opportunities that tested its adaptability more than any point since the nuclear plant first powered up. The early 2020s began with global turbulence, the effects of which rippled through Springfield immediately. Supply chains faltered, businesses adapted to new regulations, and Springfield residents discovered what it meant to navigate uncertainty at a collective scale. Schools temporarily shifted to hybrid or remote formats. Families learned how to use video calls, online classrooms, and digital work platforms, usually while dealing with scanners and devices that refused to cooperate at the worst possible moments. And because this was Springfield, the transition was messy. Kids attended online classes while pets strolled across keyboards. Teachers fought with mute buttons. Town officials attempted virtual council meetings that sometimes dissolved into pure confusion when microphones failed or someone's Wi-Fi cut out mid-sentence. But the town kept going, awkwardly, stubbornly, but successfully enough. Businesses adapted quickly. Restaurants moved to curbside pickup and delivery. Springfield Mall limited capacity and added signs that half the visitors obeyed and the other half ignored while squinting. Small shops embraced online ordering, digital payments, and social media marketing. A handful of older shop owners continued doing business exactly as they always had, which their loyal customers appreciated, even when it meant calling ahead to ask whether the store was open or if the door was just stuck again. What stood out most was Springfield's sense of community. Neighbors helped neighbors. Volunteers delivered groceries, organized support drives, and assisted families in need. Churches and community centers offered resources. Springfield had always been eccentric, but it was also deeply interconnected, and that showed more clearly than ever. As society stabilized, Springfield moved into a world shaped by new digital habits. Work-from-home arrangements continued for many people. Residents easily switched between online and in-person activities. Businesses permanently modernized their operations. Apps became part of everyday life for school, work, appointments, shopping, social events, communication, everything. The effects of this digital shift spread through the entire town. Economically, the 2020s marked a shift away from purely traditional industries into a mix of service jobs, tech-adjacent roles, and hybrid employment. The nuclear plant remained the largest employer and most controversial institution, but new kinds of work expanded fast. Remote positions with national companies, digital freelancing, IT and tech repair services, online retail businesses, healthcare expansion, delivery jobs, and logistics roles. Springfield entrepreneurs responded quickly. New cafes appeared with strong Wi-Fi for remote workers. Local artisans sold crafts online. Teenagers launched YouTube channels, Twitch streams, and small social media brands. The town's creative economy grew as people realized many hobbies could generate at least some income. The cultural fabric of Springfield evolved rapidly. Younger generations, raised on the internet, global media, and online communities, brought new values focused on inclusivity, sustainability, mental health, and modernization. Older generations, after initial skepticism, adjusted with help from grandchildren who taught them how to use apps or how to video call relatives. This created a blend of generations and cultures unique to Springfield. Teens filmed TikTok dances at landmarks. Adults balanced digital work with
traditional Springfield routines. Seniors joined internet literacy sessions at the library. Immigrant communities shared traditions through social media, adding even more cultural depth. Festivals combined modern music with classic Springfield traditions. Food trucks parked next to long-established diners. Digital art displays appeared downtown. The town, chaotic as ever, became surprisingly progressive in cultural expression. Politics became louder and more chaotic. Public debates moved to online, where residents expressed opinions energetically, sometimes based on facts and sometimes based on whatever rumor had spread through Springfield's social networks that week. Campaigns relied on social media ads, live-streamed speeches, and digital fundraising. Key debates covered infrastructure, affordable housing, school funding, environmental enforcement, mental health resources, nuclear plant safety, and business support programs. Town hall meetings were hybrid events, half in person and half online, often featuring the usual Springfield mix of technical problems, accidental unmuting, and comedic misunderstandings. Despite all this, voter engagement remained extremely high. Meanwhile, the nuclear plant continued operating under Mr. Burns' signature management style. It remains Springfield's largest employer and most controversial institution. Activists, scientists, and concerned residents pushed for updated safety protocols, modern equipment, and greater transparency. The plant faced new federal regulations, emergency drills, occasional minor incidents, political pressure to adopt renewable energy alternatives, and the challenges of aging infrastructure. Burns resisted expensive changes, insisting everything was perfectly safe, even when it clearly wasn't. Workers quietly fixed whatever they could. Residents joked about glowing wildlife. The relationship between Springfield and its plant stayed complicated but stable.
Social life revived strongly. Farmers' markets added artisan booths and food trucks. Fairs mixed digital attractions with classic carnival games. Concerts featured local musicians and internet-famous artists. The mall reinvented itself with pop-up shops, events, and tech kiosks. Downtown Springfield held art walks, tech expos, cultural festivals, and maker fairs. Restaurants thrived through dine-in, takeout, and delivery. Nightlife expanded with themed cafes, bars, lounges, and open mic events where residents performed comedy, poetry, and music. Infrastructure improvements finally became a priority. The town repaired aging water lines, updated sidewalks, modernized traffic systems, fixed bridges, and expanded public transportation routes. Electric vehicle chargers appeared throughout Springfield. Parks received upgrades, including new trails, art installations, dog parks, and renovated playgrounds. Some projects went smoothly. Others ran into detours, misunderstandings, or classic Springfield-style errors, but progress was steady. Education kept evolving too. Schools continued using hybrid learning tools. Robotics clubs, coding classes, and digital media programs grew. Teachers balanced modern technology with traditional instruction. Mental health resources expanded dramatically. Students took on leadership roles through advocacy groups, clubs, and civic projects. By the mid-2020s, Springfield had transformed into a fully modern town, technologically connected, culturally diverse, socially complex, environmentally challenged, and unmistakably itself. Downtown murals glowed under streetlights. Teens filmed videos beside the statue of Jebediah Springfield. Families enjoyed global cuisine and renovated plazas. Remote workers filled cafes. The nuclear plant hummed in the background. And through all of it, Springfield's spirit remained unshaken. As Springfield advanced deeper into the 2020s, the town confronted new realities shaped by global technology, cultural reinvention, environmental pressures, and a world growing more interconnected by the day. The same unpredictable energy that had carried Springfield from its frontier origins now pushed it into a future defined by innovation, complexity, and the digital age's constantly shifting pace. And, as always, Springfield met this era with enthusiasm, confusion, resilience, and the familiar attitude of, we'll figure it out eventually. By the mid to late 2020s, Springfield could no longer ignore the rise of automation and artificial intelligence. The town had always been a little behind technologically, but suddenly automation appeared everywhere at once. Local businesses began installing AI-powered tools for scheduling, inventory, and customer service. Some early attempts went badly. A grocery store robot tried sorting customers by height, and a diner's digital register once refused to sell pancakes because it classified them as restricted items. But after enough trial and error, Springfield settled into using these tools routinely. Schools introduced AI-assisted tutoring systems to help students with math, science, languages, and writing. Teachers used analytics to identify gaps in understanding. Students used AI for research, brainstorming, and creating excuses that teachers immediately recognized as AI-generated. At the nuclear plant, automation upgrades were minimal. Mr. Burns disliked spending money on anything modern, useful, or capable of preventing problems. A few AI safety systems were installed, but were often ignored, overridden, or unplugged during cleaning. Workers joked that the plant had advanced software only during brief moments when the servers weren't overheating and nobody had bumped a cable loose. But despite these inconsistencies, Springfield slowly incorporated automation into daily life. Smart homes became common. Residents used voice assistants for weather, reminders, shopping lists, and occasional accidental bulk orders of pudding. Even older Springfield residents, once intimidated by touchscreens, now use digital assistants to manage their routines. Culturally, the town kept evolving at full speed. Springfield's creative scene blended traditional art with digital expression. Local artists created animated murals and interactive installations. Downtown buildings featured augmented reality artwork visible through phones. Museums added digital overlays to their exhibits, using holographic reenactments to show key moments in Springfield's history, although early versions glitched, replacing historical figures with random animals. Food culture expanded dramatically. Food trucks filled downtown streets, serving fusion dishes. New cafes and restaurants appeared offering vegan, organic, gluten-free, and experimental menus. Long-established diners updated their offerings without losing their character. Residents debated endlessly about which places had the best new items, and Springfield's culinary landscape became one of the liveliest in years. Entertainment shifted too. Streaming platforms dominated home viewing, but Springfield still valued public entertainment. Outdoor concerts, street performances, and community theater thrived. The mall hosted themed weekends and pop-up experiences. Bars and clubs incorporated digital screens, karaoke, trivia nights, and retro themes. Even bowling alleys upgraded with projection lanes and modern lighting. Environmental concerns grew louder. Springfield faced river contamination, unusually bright wildlife, landfill pressure, storm drain failures, and fluctuating air quality. In the 2020s, the town finally took these issues more seriously. Recycling expanded to include electronics, textiles, and compost. Solar panels appeared on public buildings. Bike lanes were added, though often imperfectly placed. Community gardens multiplied. Schools grew environmental clubs. Arbor Day became a major town event with tree planting, education booths, and seedlings distributed to families. Environmental activists maintained pressure on the nuclear plant. Some minor improvements occurred, better storage, improved training, more safety monitoring, but Burns resisted major reforms. Still, environmental awareness became a defining value for Springfield's younger residents, who viewed ecological responsibility as essential.
The 2020s also brought increased attention to mental health and social well-being. Springfield faced rising stress levels, political tension, and generational divides. Schools boosted mental health support with more counselors and wellness initiatives. Community centers offered support groups and mindfulness sessions. Employers experimented with flexible schedules. Clinics expanded services.
For the first time in decades, Springfield residents openly discussed stress, burnout, and emotional health across age groups. Neighborhoods used social platforms to coordinate events, local projects, and support drives. Block parties, charity events, and community volunteering became more common, strengthening Springfield's connected identity even in the digital age. Late in the decade, the question of the nuclear plant's future became Springfield's most important political issue. Younger residents pushed for renewable energy and modern reforms. Older residents stressed the plant's importance as a job provider. Scientists demanded upgrades and safer systems. Business leaders warned of economic disruption if the plant closed. Burns insisted the plant was flawless, a claim contradicted daily. As renewable energy got cheaper, Springfield debated solar fields, wind turbines, and geothermal projects using the town's famous hot springs. By the end of the 2020s, no final decision had been made, but the conversation could no longer be ignored. Springfield stood on the edge of a major energy transition, whether it wanted to or not. As the decade closed, Springfield had transformed into a town that was unmistakably modern, while still unmistakably itself. It was a place where glowing wildlife roamed near hiking trails, where city council meetings could turn unpredictable at any moment, where the nuclear plant still hummed in the background, and where digital screens, murals, cafes, festivals, and community events filled residents' lives. Springfield was chaotic, creative, flawed, vibrant, diverse, talkative, stubborn, and proud, and ready for whatever came next. Whatever the future held, it would be shaped by the same strange, resilient spirit that had always defined Springfield.
That's the full lore of Springfield, a town that somehow survives every disaster thrown its way. If you want more content like this, subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching.